Illustration, Delft. Blanche McManus Mansfield. We learn, however, that the original wood blocks will be shown at the St. Louis Exposition, in the section to be devoted to the work of American artists resident abroad. We suggest that all lovers of latter-day bookmaking make a note of it, recalling meanwhile that it was this successful American designer who produced also the decorative woodcut borders and initials which were used in the Coronation Prayer Book of King Edward Roman VII, issued from the celebrated Oxford University Press. There were 40 initials or headings embodying the coronation regalia, including the crown, scepter, rose, thistle, shamrock, etc. The magnificent cover for the book was also designed by this artist. Among the American artists who have made a distinctive place in art circles, not only in America but on the other side, is Mrs. M. F. Mansfield, formerly Blanche McManus of Woodville, Mississippi. In London, she is widely known as a skillful, able, and versatile artist, and her remarkable success there is an illustration of the American invasion. Little has been written in America, especially in the South, of what this talented Southern woman has accomplished. She has never sought personal advertisement. On the contrary, she has shrunk from any kind of publicity, even that which would have accrued from a proper valuation of her work. She is one of those artists whose talent is equaled only by her modesty, who, enamored of her art and aiming at a patient, painstaking realization of her ideal, has been content to work on in silence. In the estimation of art connoisseurs, Blanche McManus is an artist of unquestionable talent and varied composition, who has already done much striking work. Her execution in the various branches has attracted international attention. She paints well in watercolors and in oil, and her etching is considered excellent. Her drawing is stamped good, and every year she has showed rapid improvement in design. She is a highly cultivated woman with a close and accurate observation. A sincere appreciation of nature was revealed in her earliest efforts, and for some years she devoted much time to its study. Moorings Quarterly says in regard to the special work which Mrs. Mansfield has done, "It is so seldom that an artist is able to take in hand what may be termed the entire decoration of a book, including, in that phrase, cover, illustration, colophon, head and tail pieces, initial letters, and borders, that it is a pleasure to find in the subject of our paper a lady who may be said to be capable of taking all these points into consideration in the embellishment of a volume." B. Medici Marie de / B. wife of Henry Roman IV. Born at Florence, 1573, died at Cologne, 1642. A portrait of herself engraved on wood bears the legend, Maria Medici FMDLXXI. Another portrait of a girl attributed to her is signed LO 1617. It may be considered a matter of grave doubt whether the 9-year-old girl drew and engraved with her own hand the first-named charming picture, which has been credited to her with such frank insouciance. B. Mengs Anna Maria / B. member of the Academy of San Fernando. She was a daughter of Anton Raphael Mengs and was born in Dresden in 1751, where she received instruction from her father. In 1777, she married the engraver Salvador Carmona in Rome and went with him to Spain, where she died in 1790. Portraits and miniatures of excellent quality were executed by her, and on them her reputation rests. B. Miriam Maria Sibylla / B. born at Frankfurt-on-the-Main in 1647. This artist merits our attention, although her art was devoted to an unusual purpose. Her father was a learned geographer and engraver whose published works are voluminous. Her maternal grandfather was the eminent engraver Theodore de Bry or Brie. From her childhood, Anna Sibylla Miriam displayed an aptitude for drawing and a special interest in insect life. The latter greatly disturbed her mother, but she could not turn the child's attention from entomology, and was forced to allow that study to become her chief pursuit. The flower painter, Abraham Mignon, was her master in drawing and painting, but at an early age, before her studies were well advanced, she married an architect, John Andrew Graff, of Nuremberg, with whom she lived unhappily. She passed nearly 20 years in great seclusion, and, as she tells us in the preface to one of her books, she devoted these years to the examination and study of various insects, watching their transformations and making drawings from them. Many of these were in colors on parchment and were readily sold to connoisseurs. Her first published work was called The Wonderful Transformations of Caterpillars. It appeared in 1679, was fully illustrated by copperplate engravings, executed by herself from her own designs. About 1684, she separated from her husband, and with her daughters returned to Frankfurt. Many interesting stories are told of her life there. She made a journey to Friesland and was a convert to the doctrines of Labadie, but she was still devoted to her study and research. She was associated with the notable men of her time and became the friend of the father of Rachel Reich. Although Madame Mirian, who had taken her maiden name, was 17 years older than the gifted flower painter, she became to her an example of industry and devotion to study. Madame Mirian had long desired to examine the insects of Suriname, and in 1699, by the aid of the Dutch government, she made the journey of which a French poet wrote. Sibylle à Suriname va chercher la nature, avec l'esprit d'un sage, et le cœur d'un héros, which indicates the view then held of a journey which would now attract no attention. While in Guyana, some natives brought her a box filled with lantern flies, as they were then called. The noise they made at night was so disturbing that she liberated them, and the flies, regaining liberty, flashed out their most brilliant light, for which Madame Mirian was unprepared, and in her surprise dropped the box. From this circumstance, a most exaggerated idea obtained concerning the illuminating power of the flies. The climate of Suriname was so unhealthy for Madame Mirian that she could remain there but 2 years, and in that time she gathered the materials for her great work called Metamorphoses Insectorum Surinamensium. Etc. The illustrations were her own, and she pictured many most interesting objects, animals, and vegetables, as well as insects which were quite unknown in Europe. Several editions of this book were published both in German and French. Her plates are still approved and testify to the scope and thoroughness of her research, as well as to her powers as an artist. Her chief work, however, was a history of the insects of Europe, drawn from nature, and explained by Maria Sibylla Mirian. The illustrations of this work were beautiful and of great interest, as the insects, from their first state to their last, were represented with the plants and flowers which they loved, each object being correctly and tastefully pictured. Most of the original paintings for these works are in the British Museum. In the Vienna Gallery is a basket of flowers by this artist, and in the Ball Museum a picture of locust and chafers. The daughters of this learned artist-naturalist, Joanna Maria Helena and Dorothea, shared the pursuits and labors of their mother, and it was her intention to publish their drawings as an appendix to her works. She did not live to do this, and later the daughters published a separate volume of their own. This extraordinary woman, whose studies and writings added so much to the knowledge of her time, was neither beautiful nor graceful. Her portraits present a woman with hard and heavy features, her hair in short curls surmounted by a stiff and curious headdress, made of folds of some black stuff. B. Merit, Mrs. Anna Lee, /B. Honorable Mention, Paris Exposition, 1889, 2 medals and a diploma, Chicago Exposition, 1893. In 1890, her picture of Love Locked Out was purchased by the Chantry Fund, London, for £250. This honor has been accorded to few women, and of these I think Mrs. Merit was first. Member of the Royal Society of Painterechers, born in Philadelphia. Pupil of Heinrich Hoffmann in Dresden, and of Henry Merit, whom she married in London. Mrs. Merit has a home in Hampshire, England, but is frequently in Philadelphia, where she exhibits her pictures, which have also been seen at the Royal Academy since 1871. This artist is represented by her pictures in the National Gallery of British Art, in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and by her portrait of Mr. James Russell Lowell in Memorial Hall, Harvard University. B. Michis Maria, /B. Cicatenio. B. Milbacher, Louise von, /B. Prize at Berlin in 1886. Born at Bomischbrod, 1845, pupil of Ponninger and Eisenmenger, a painter of portraits and of sacred and genre subjects. 3 of her portraits are well-known, those of Baron Thienen, General von Neuwirth, and Baron Eber-Reschenbach. The altarpiece in the chapel of the Vienna Institute, A Holy Family, is by this artist. She has also painted still life and animal subjects. B. Modigliani, Signorina Corona, /B. Silver Medal at Turin Exposition, 1898. Silver Medal at the Exposition of Feminine Art, 1899-1900. Diploma at Leghorn, 1901, gold medal. Member of the International Artistic Association. Born in Rome. Pupil of Professor Commendator Pietro Vanni. This artist has exhibited her works in the expositions of Rome, Turin, Milan, Leghorn, Munich, Petersburg, and Paris since 1897, and will contribute to the St. Louis Exposition. Her pictures have been sold in Paris, London, and Ireland, as well as in Rome and other Italian cities, where many of them are in the collections of distinguished families. B. Moldura, Lilla, /B. a Neapolitan painter. Her father was an Italian and her mother a Spaniard. She was instructed in the elements of art by various excellent teachers, and then studied oil painting under Maldarelli and watercolor under Mancini. She has often exhibited pictures in Naples, to the satisfaction of both artists and critics, and has also won success in London. She has been almost equally happy in views of the picturesque Campagna and in interiors, both in oil and watercolors. The interior of the Chapel of the Immaculate Conception in the Church of the Gerolomini is strong in execution and good in drawing and color. B. Merler, Agnes Slot, /B. born in 1862, resides in Copenhagen. The especial work of this artist, by which her reputation is worldwide, is the illustration of old legends for children's books. B. Montalba, Clara, /B., Associate of the Society of Painters in Watercolors, London, and of the Belgian Society of Watercolorists. Born in Cheltenham, 1842, pupil of Isaby in Paris. Her professional life has been spent in London and Venice. She has sent her pictures to the Academy and the Grosvenor Gallery exhibitions since 1879. Blessing a Tomb, Westminster, was at the Philadelphia Exposition, 1876. Corner of St. Mark's and Fishing Boats, Venice, were at Paris, 1878. In 1874, she exhibited at the Society of British Artists, Il Giardino Pubblico, the public garden of which a writer in the art journal said, Il Giardino Pubblico stands foremost among the few redeeming features of the exhibition. In delicate perception of natural beauty, the picture suggests the example of Corot. Like the great Frenchman, Miss Montalba strives to interpret the sadder moods of nature, when the wind moves the water a little mournfully, and the outlines of the objects become uncertain in the filmy air. B. Mordo, Emma, /B. Venetian painter, exhibited at Naples in 1877, Abbey of St. Gregory at Venice. At Turin in 1880, a fine view of the Canal of the Giudecca and Canal of S. Giorgio. At the National Exposition in Milan, 1881, sunset and a marine view. At Rome in 1883, excursion on the lagoon. Still others of the same general character are a gondola at St. Mark's, Grand Canal, morning at sea, etc. B. Moran, Therese Concordia, /B. born in Dresden, 1725, died in Rome, 1806, pupil of her father Ismail Mengs. Her attention was divided between enamel painting and pastel, much of the latter being miniature work. In the Dresden Gallery are two of her pastel portraits and two copies in miniature of Correggio, viz., a half-length portrait of herself and a portrait of her sister, Julie Mengs, a copy of St. Jerome, or The Day original in Parmand, The Night. A curious story has recently been published to the effect that in 1767, this artist sent word to Duke Xavier of Saxony that during the 7 Years' War she painted a copy in miniature of Correggio's Holy Mother with the Christ Child, Mary Magdalene, Hieronymus, and two angels, which she sent by Cardinal Albani to the Dukes Father Frederick Augustus Roman II, of Saxony and Augustus Roman III, of Poland at Warsaw. It was claimed that 250 ducats were due her. Apparently the demand was not met, but on the other hand, the lady seems to have received for some years a pension of 300 thalers from the Electorate of Saxony without making any return. Probably her claim was satisfied by this pension. B. Moser, Mary, /B. one of the original members of the London Academy, the daughter of a German artist who resided in London. She was as well known for her wit as for her art. A friend of Fuseli, she was said to be as much in love with him as he was in love with Angelica Kauffmann. Dr. Johnson sometimes met Miss Moser at the house of Nollekens, where they made merry over a cup of tea. Queen Charlotte commissioned this painter to decorate a chamber, for which work she paid more than £900, and was so well pleased that she complimented the artist by commanding the apartment to be called Miss Moser's room. B. Mott, Mrs. Alice, /B. born at Walton-on-Thames, pupil of the Slade School and Royal Academy in London and of M. Charles Chaplin in Paris in his studio, a miniaturist whose works are much esteemed. Her work is lifelike, artistic, and strong in drawing, color, and composition. After finishing her study under masters, she took up miniature painting by herself, studying the works of old miniaturists. Recently, she writes me, "I have departed from the ordinary portrait miniature and am now painting what I call picture miniatures. For instance, I am now at work on the portrait of Miss D.C., who is in old-fashioned dress, low bodice, and long leg of mutton sleeves. She is represented as running in the open, with sky and tree background. She has a butterfly net over her shoulder, which floats out on the wind. She is looking up and smiling, her hair and her sash are blown out. It is to be called, I'd Be a Butterfly. The dress is the yellow of the common butterfly. It is a large miniature. I hope to send it with others to the St. Louis Exposition. Her miniatures are numerous and in private hands. A very interesting one belongs to the Bishop of Ripon and is a portrait of Mrs. Carpenter, his mother. B. Muntz Laura A/B. B. Murray Elizabeth /B. member of the Institute of Painters in Watercolors, London, and of the American Society of Watercolor Painters, New York. Her pictures are of genre subjects, many of them being of Oriental figures. Among these are music in Morocco, a Moorish saint, the Greek betrothed, etc. Other subjects are the Gypsy Queen, Dalmatian peasant, the old story in Spain, etc. B. Nathan, Signora Lilia Ascoli, /B. Rome. B. Negro, Teresa, /B. born in Turin, where she resides. She has made a study of antique pottery and has been successful in its imitation. Her vases and amphorae have been frequently exhibited and are praised by connoisseurs and critics. At the Italian National Exposition, 1880, she exhibited a terracotta reproduction of a classic design, painted in oils, also a wooden dish which resembled an antique ceramic. B. Nelli, Plautilla, /B. There is a curious fact connected with two women artists of Florence in the middle of the 16th century. In that city of pageants where Ghirlandajo saw, in the streets, in churches, and on various ceremonial occasions, the beautiful women with whom he still makes us acquainted, these ladies, daughters of noble Florentine families, were nuns. No Shakespearean dissector has, to my knowledge, affirmed that Hamlet's advice to Ophelia, "Get thee to a nunnery," and his assertion, "I have heard of your paintings, too," prove that Ophelia was an artist and a nunnery a favorable place in which to set up a studio. Yet I think I could make this assumption as convincing as many that have been proved by the post-obidum atomizers of the great poets every word. But we have not far to seek for the reasons which led Plautilla Nelli and Maria Maddalena de Pazzi to choose the conventual life. The subjects of their pictures prove that their thoughts were fixed on a life quite out of tune with that which surrounded them in their homes. If they pictured rich draperies and rare gems, it was but to adorn with them the Blessed Virgin Mother and the holy saints, in token of their belief that all of pomp and value in this life can but faintly symbolize the glory of the life to come. Plautilla Nelli, born in Florence in 1523, entered the convent of St. Catherine of Siena, in her native city, and in time became its abbess. Patiently, with earnest prayer, she studied and copied the works of Fra Bartolomeo and Andrea del Sardo, until she was able to paint an original, Adoration of the Magi, of such excellence as to secure her a place among the painters of Florence. Many of her pictures remained in her convent, but she also painted a Madonna surrounded by saints for the choir of Santa Lucia at Pistoia. There are pictures attributed to Plautilla Nelli in Berlin, notably the Visit of Martha to Christ, which are characterized by the earnestness, purity, and grace of her beloved Fra Bartolomeo. Her Adoration of the Wise Men is at Parma, the Descent from the Cross in Florence, the Last Supper in the Church of Santa Maria Novella, Florence. There are traditions of her success as a teacher of painting in her convent, but of this we have no exact knowledge such as we have of the work of the Sewer Plautilla, the name by which she came to be known in all Italy. Benemes Ransonnet, Countess Elissa, /B. born at Vienna, 1843. She studied successively with Vastag, Lulos, Einer, Schilcher, Lenbach, Angeli, and J. Bankser, and opened her studio at Kunschent Miklos near Budapest. The invitation to the wedding was well received, and her portraits of Schiller and Perxel are in public galleries, the former in the Vienna Kunstlerhaus and the latter in the Deputy House at Budapest. B. Newcomb, Maria Guise, / B. born in New Jersey, pupil of Schenk Chialiva and Edouard Didel in Paris, traveled in Algeria and the Sahara, studying the Arab and his horses. Very few artists can be compared with Miss Newcomb in representing horses. She has a genius for portraying this animal and understands its anatomy as few painters have done. She was but a child when sketching horses and cattle was her pastime, and so great was her fondness for it that the usual dolls and other toys were crowded out of her life. Her studies in Paris were comprehensive, and her work shows the results and places her among the distinguished painters of animals. Binet Elizabeth / B. born in 1830. After studying at the Academy in Berlin, this sculptor went to Munich, where she was devoted to her art. She then came to Texas and remained some years in America. She returned to Berlin in 1897. Among her best-known works are busts of Garibaldi, of J. Grimm, 1863, Prometheus Bound, 1868, and a statue of Louis Roman II, of Bavaria. B. Nichols, Mrs. Rhoda Holmes, / B. Queen's Scholarship, Bloomsbury Art School, London. Gold Medal, Competitive Prize Fund Exhibition, New York, Medal, Chicago Exposition, 1893. Medal, Tennessee Exposition, 1897. Bronze Medal at Buffalo Exposition, 1901. Member of American Watercolor Society, New York Watercolor Society, Woman's Art Club, American Society of Miniature Painters, Pen and Brush Club. Honorable Member of Woman's Art Club, Canada. Born in Coventry, England. Pupil of Bloomsbury School of Art, London, of Canarano and Vertini in Rome, where she was elected to the Circolo Artistico and the Società degli Aquarellisti. Her pictures are chiefly figure subjects, among which are Those Evening Bells, The Scarlet Letter, A Daughter of Eve, Indian After the Chase, Searching the Scriptures, etc. In the studio, March 1901, in writing of the exhibition of the American Watercolor Society, the critic says, "In her two works, Cherries and a Rose, Mrs. Rhoda Holmes Nichols shows us a true watercolor executed by a master hand. The subject of each is slight. Each stroke of her brush is made once and for all, with a precision and dash that are inspiriting, and you have in each painting the sparkle, the deft lightness of touch, the instantaneous impression of form and coloring that a watercolor should have." Illustration, An Indian After the Chase. Rhoda Holmes Nichols. Mrs. Nichols is also known as an illustrator. Harold Payne says of her, "Rhoda Holmes Nichols, although an illustrator of the highest order, cannot be strictly classed as one, for the reason that she is equally great in every other branch of art. However, as many of her best examples of watercolors are ultimately reproduced for illustrative purposes, and as even her oil paintings frequently find their way into the pages of art publications, it is not wrong to denominate her as an illustrator, and that of the most varied and prolific type. She may, like most artists, have a specialty, but a walk through her studio and a critical examination of her work ranging all along the line of oil paintings, watercolors of the most exquisite type, wash drawings, crayons, and pastels would scarcely result in discovering her specialty. As a colorist, she has few rivals, and her acute knowledge of drawing and genius for composition are apparent in everything she does. B. Nichols, Catherine Maud, R.E. /B. The pictures of this artist have been hung on the line at the Royal Academy exhibitions a dozen times at least. From Munich, she has received an official letter thanking her for sending her works to exhibitions in that city. Fellow of the Royal Painter-Etchers Society, President of the Woodpecker Art Club, Norwich, member of Norwich Art Circle and of a Miniature Painters Society and the Green Park Club, London. Born in Norwich. Self-taught. Has worked in the open at Barbizon, in Normandy, in Cornwall, Devon, London, and all around the east coast of Norfolk. Miss Nichols has held 3 exhibitions of her pictures both in oil and watercolors in London. She has executed more than 100 copper plates, chiefly dry points. The pictures in oils and watercolors, the miniatures and the proofs of her works have found purchasers, almost without exception, and are in private hands. Most of the plates she has retained. Miss Nichols has illustrated some books, her own poems being of the number, as well as her Old Norwich. She has also made illustrations for journals and magazines. One is impressed most agreeably with the absence of mannerism in Miss Nichols' work, as well as with the pronounced artistic treatment of her subjects. Her sketches of sea and river scenery are attractive. The views from her home county, Norfolk, have a delightful feeling about them. Norwich River at evening is not only a charming picture, but shows, in its perspective and its values, the hand of a skillful artist. Mousehold Heath, showing a rough and broken country, is one of her strongest pictures in oils. Stretching to the Sea is also excellent. Among the watercolors, Strangers' Hall, Norwich, and Fleeting Clouds merit attention, as do a number of others. One could rarely see so many works with such varied subjects, treated in oils, watercolors, dry point, etc. by the same artist. I quote the following paragraph from the Studio of April, 1903. Miss C. M. Nichols is an artist of unquestionable talent, and her work in the various mediums she employs deserves careful attention. She paints well both in watercolors and in oil, and her etchings are among the best that the lady artists of our time have produced. Her drawing is good, her observation is close and accurate, and she shows year by year an improvement in design. Miss Nichols was for several years the only lady fellow of the Royal Society of Painter-Etchers. Her Brancaster Staithe and Fir Trees, Crown Point, Dry Points, are in the Norwich Art Gallery, presented by Sir Seymour Haddon, President of the Royal Society of Painter-Etchers. Two of her works, a large oil painting of Earlham and a watercolor of Strangers' Hall, have been purchased by subscription and presented to the Norwich Castle Art Gallery. B. Nicolau Y. Parody, Teresa, /B. member of the Academy of San Fernando and of the Academy of San Carlos of Valencia. This artist, who was born in Madrid, early showed an enthusiasm for painting, which she at first practiced in various styles, but gradually devoted herself entirely to miniature. She has contributed to many public exhibitions and has received many prizes and honorable mentions, as well as praise from the critics. Among her portraits are those of Isabel de Braganza, Washington, MME, de Montespan, MME, Dewberry, Queen Margaret of Austria, and Don Carlos, son of Philip Roman II. Her other works include a Magdalene in the Desert, Laura and Petrarch, Joseph with the Christ Child, Francis I, at the Battle of Pavia, and many good copies after celebrated painters. B. Niederhausen, Emil, Sophie/B. Medal at the Swiss National Exposition, 1896. Member of the Exposition Permanente de l'Athénée, Geneva, born at Geneva, pupil of Professor Wyman and M. Albert Goes and of M. and MME, de Montbreton in France. Emil Niederhausen paints landscapes principally, and has taken her subjects from the environs of Geneva, in the Valais, and in Pas-de-Calais, France. Her picture, called the Bord du Lac de Genève, was purchased by the city and is in the Rath Museum. She also paints flowers and uses watercolors as well as oils. B. Nobili, Elena/B. Silver Medal at the Beatrice Exposition, Florence, 1890. Born in Florence, where she resides, she is most successful in figure subjects. She is sympathetic in her treatment of them and is able to impart to her works a sentiment which appeals to the observer. Among her pictures are Rieti, The Good-Natured One, September, In the Country, Music, and Contrasts. B. Normand, Mrs. Ernest Henrietta Ray/B. Medals in Paris and at Chicago Exposition, 1893. Born in London, 1859. Daughter of T.B. Ray, Esquire, married the artist Ernest Normand, 1884. Pupil of Queen's Square School of Art, Heatherley's, British Museum, and Royal Academy Schools. Began the study of art at the age of 13. First exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1880 and has sent important pictures there annually since that time. Mrs. Normand executed decorative frescoes in the Royal Exchange, London, the subject being Sir Richard Whittington and his charities. In the past 10 years, she has exhibited Mariana, 1893, Psyche at the Throne of Venus, 1894, Apollo and Daphne, 1895, Summer, 1896, Isabella, 1897, Diana and Callisto, 1899, Portrait of Marquis of Dufferin and Ava, 1901, Lady Winifred Renshaw and Son, and The Sirens, 1903, which is a picture of 3 nude enchantresses on a sandy shore watching a distant galley among rocky islets. B. Nurse, Elizabeth/B. Medal at Chicago Exposition, 1903, Nashville Exposition, 1897, Carthage Institute, Tunis, 1897, Elected Associate of the Beaux Arts, Paris, 1895. Silver Medal, Paris Exposition, 1900 elected Sociétaire des Beaux-Arts, 1901. Born in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she began her studies, later going to the Julian Academy under Boulanger and Lefebvre, and afterwards studying with Carolus Duran and Henner. This artist idealizes the subjects of everyday, practical life and gives them a poetic quality which is an uncommon and delightful attainment. At the Salon des Beaux-Arts, 1902, Miss Nurse exhibited The Children, Evening Toilet of the Baby, In the Shade at Penmark, Brother and Sister at Penmark, The Magdalen Chapel at Penmark. In 1903, Our Lady of Joy, Penmark, Around the Cradle, The Little Sister, and A Breton Interior. B. Oakley, Violet, /B member of Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia Watercolor Club, Plastic Club, Philadelphia. Born in New Jersey, but has lived in New York, where she studied at the Art Students League under Carol Beckwith. Pupil of Colin and Amandine in Paris and Charles Lasar in England, also in Philadelphia of Joseph de Camp, Henry Thowerin, Cecilia Beau, and Howard Pyle. Miss Oakley has executed mural decorations, a mosaic reredos, and 5 stained glass windows in the Church of All Saints, New York City, and a window in the Convent of the Holy Child, at Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. In the summer of 1903, she was commissioned to decorate the walls of the governor's reception room in the new Capitol at Harrisburg. Before engaging in this work, the first of its kind, to be confided to an American woman, Miss Oakley went to Italy to study mural painting. She then went to England to thoroughly inform herself concerning the historical foundation of her subject, the history of the earliest days of Pennsylvania. At Oxford and in London, she found what she required, and on her return to America established herself in a studio in Villanova, Pennsylvania, to make her designs for the romance of the founding of the state, which is to be painted on a frieze 5 feet deep. The room is 70 by 30 feet and 16 feet in height. The decoration of this Capitol is to be more elaborate and costly than that of any other public edifice in the United States. In mural decoration, Miss Oakley will be associated with Edwin A. Abbey, but the governor's room is to be her work entirely and will doubtless occupy her during several years. Mr. Charles A. Caffin, in his article upon the exhibition of the New York Watercolor Club, January 1904, says, Miss Oakley has had considerable experience in designing stained glass windows and has reproduced in some of her designs for book covers a corresponding treatment of the composition, with an attempt, not very logical or desirable, considering the differences between paint and glass, to reproduce also something of her window color schemes. But for myself, her cover, in which some girls are picking flowers, is far more charming in its easy grace of composition, choice gravity of color, and spontaneity of feeling. Here is revealed a very naive imagination, free of any obsessions. B. Accioni, Signora Lucilla Marzillo, /B Diploma of Gold Medal at the Women's Exhibition, Earl's Court, London, 1900. Born in Trieste. Pupil, in Rome, of Professor Giuseppe Ferrari. This artist paints figure subjects, portraits, landscapes, and flowers in both oils and watercolors, and also makes pen drawings. Her works are in many private galleries. She gives me no list of subjects. Her pictures have been praised by critics. B. O'Connell, Frederique Emily August Myeth, /B born in Potsdam, 1823-1885. She passed her early life in her native city, having all the advantages of a solid and brilliant education. She early exhibited a love of drawing and devoted herself to the study of anatomical plates. She soon designed original subjects and introduced persons of her own imagination, which early marked her as powerful in her fancy and original in her manner of rendering her ideas. A picture of Raphael and the Fornarina, which she executed at the age of 15, was so satisfactory as to determine her fate, and she was allowed to study art. When about 18 years old, she became the pupil of Charles Joseph Begaz, a very celebrated artist of Berlin. Under his supervision, she painted her first picture, called The Day of the Dupes, which, though full of faults, had also virtues enough to secure much attention in the exhibition. It was first hung in a disadvantageous position, but the crowd discovered its merits and would have it noticed. She received a complimentary letter from the Academy of Berlin, and the venerable artist Cornelius made her a visit of congratulation. About 1844, she married and removed to Brussels. Here she came into an entirely new atmosphere, and her manner of painting was changed. She sought to free herself from all outer influence and to express her own feeling. She studied color especially, and became an imitator of Rubens. She gained in Brussels all the medals of the Belgian expositions, and there began two historical pictures, Peter the Great and Catherine, and Maria Theresa and Frederick the Great. These were not finished until after her removal to Paris in 1853. They were bought by Prince Demidov for the Russian government. She obtained her first triumph in Paris, at the Salon of 1853, by a portrait of Rachel. She represented the famous actress dressed entirely in white, with the worn expression which her professional exertions and the fatal malady from which she was already suffering had given to her remarkable face. The critics had no words for this portrait which were not words of praise, and 2 years later, in 1855, Madame O'Connell reached the height of her talent. A fauness, as it was called in the exposition of that year, was a remarkable work, and thus described by Barty. A strong and beautiful young woman was seated near a spring, where beneath the shade of the chestnut trees, the water lilies spread themselves out upon the stream which flowed forth. She was nude, and her flesh palpitated beneath the caresses of the sun. With feminine caprice, she wore a bracelet of pearls of the style of the gold workers of the Renaissance. Her black hair had lights of golden brown upon it, and she opened her great brown eyes with an expression of indifference. A half-smile played upon her rosy lips and lessened the oval of the face like that of the dancing faun. The whole effect of the lines of the figure was bold and gave an appearance of youth. The extremities were studiously finished, the skin was fine, and the whole tournure elegant. It was a fauness of Fontainebleau of the time of the Valois. Mme. O'Connell then executed several fine portraits of Rachel, one of M. O'Connell, others of Charles Edward and Théophile Gautier, which were likened to works of Van Dyck, and a portrait in crayon of herself which was a chef d'oeuvre. She excelled in rendering passionate natures. She found in her palette the secret of that pallor which spreads itself over the faces of those devoted to study the fatigues of days and nights without sleep. She knew how to kindle the feverish light in the eyes of poets and of the women of society. She worked with great freedom, used a thick pate in which she brushed freely, and left the ridges thus made in the colors. Then, later, she put over a glaze, and all was done. Her etchings were also executed with great freedom, and many parts, especially the hair, were remarkably fine. She finished numerous etchings, among which a Saint Magdalene in the desert and a Charity surrounded by children are worthy of particular notice. After Madame O'Connell removed to Paris, she opened a large atelier and received many pupils. It was a most attractive place, with gorgeous pieces of antique furniture, loaded with models of sculpture, books, albums, engravings, and so on, while draperies, tapestries, armor, and ornaments in copper and brass all lent their colors and effects to enhance the attractions of the place. Many persons of rank and genius were among the friends of the artist, and she was much in society. In spite of all her talent and all her success, the end of Madame O'Connell's life was sad beyond expression. Her health suffered, her reason tottered and faded out, yet life remained, and she was for years in an asylum for the insane. Everything that had surrounded her in her Paris home was sold at auction. No time was given, and no attempt was made to bring her friends together. No one who had known or loved her was there to shed a tear or to bear away a memento of her happy past. All the beautiful things of which we have spoken were sacrificed and scattered as unconscionably, as if she had never loved or her friends enjoyed them. In the busy world of Paris, no one remembered the brilliant woman who had flashed upon them, gained her place among them, and then disappeared. They recalled neither her genius nor her womanly qualities which they had admired, appreciated, and so soon forgot. B. Oosterwyk, Maria van /B. The 17th century is remarkable for the perfection attained in still life and flower painting. The most famous masters in this art were William van Aelst of Delft, the brothers de Heem of Utrecht, William Calf, and the Van Huysems of Amsterdam. The last of this name, however, Jan van Huysum, belongs to the next century. Maria van Oosterwyk and Rachel Reich disputed honors with the above-named and are still famous for their talents. The former was a daughter of a preacher of the Reformed religion. She was born at Nootdorp, near Delft, in 1630. She was the pupil of Jan David de Heem, and her pictures were remarkable for accuracy in drawing, fine coloring, and an admirable finish. Louis Roman XIV. Of France, William Roman III. Of England, the Emperor Leopold of Germany and Augustus I of Poland gave her commissions for pictures. Large prices were paid her in a most deferential manner, as if the tributes of friendship rather than the reward of labor, and to these generous sums were added gifts of jewels and other precious objects. Of Maria van Oosterwijk Kugler writes, "In my opinion, she does not occupy that place in the history of the art of this period that she deserves, which may be partly owing to the rarity of her pictures, especially in public galleries. For although her flower pieces are weak in arrangement and often gaudy in the combination of color, she yet represents her flowers with the utmost truth of drawing, and with a depth, brilliancy, and juiciness of local coloring unattained by any other flower painter. A picture in the Vienna gallery of a sunflower with tulips and poppies in glowing color is probably her best work in a public collection. Her pictures are also in the galleries of Dresden, Florence, Karlsruhe, Copenhagen, the Schwerin Gallery, and the Metropolitan Museum of New York. There is a romantic story told of Maria van Oosterwijk, as follows. William van Aelst, the painter of exquisite pictures of still life, fruits, glass, and objects in gold and silver, was a suitor for her hand. She did not love him, but wishing not to be too abrupt in her refusal, she required, as a condition of his acceptance, that he should work 10 hours a day during a year. This he readily promised to do. His studio being opposite that of Maria, she watched narrowly for the days when he did not work and marked them down on her window sash. At the close of the year, Van Aelst claimed her as his bride, assuming that he had fulfilled her condition. But she pointed to the record of his delinquencies, and he could but accept her crafty dismissal of his suit. B. Osenga, Giuseppina, /B. This artist resides in Parma and has there exhibited landscapes that are praised for their color and for the manner in which they are painted, as well as for the attractive subjects she habitually chooses. A view near Parma, the Faces of Montmorency, and the Bridge of Otero are 3 of her works which are especially admired. B. Ostertag, Blanche, /B. Member of Society of Western Artists, Arts Club Chicago, Municipal Art League. Born in St. Louis. From 1890 to 1896, pupil of Laurens and Raphael Collin in Paris, where her works were hung on the line at the New Gallery, Champ de Mars. A decorative artist who has executed mural decoration in a private house in Chicago and has illustrated Max Muller's Memories and other publications. For use in schools, she made a color print, reading of the Declaration of Independence before the Army. Her calendars and posters are in demand by collectors at home and in foreign countries. Miss Ostertag has designed elaborate chimney pieces to be executed in mosaic and glass. Her droll conceits in Mary and Her Lamb, The 10 Little Injuns, and other juvenile tales were complemented by Bautet de Monville, who was so much interested in her work that he gave her valuable criticism and advice without solicitation. B. Ottamachiavara, /B. Gold medal at an exhibition of laces in Rome and prizes at all the exhibitions held in Palermo by the Art Club. Born in Tokyo, where she came to the notice of Vincenzo Ragusa, a Sicilian sculptor in the employ of the Japanese government at Tokyo. He taught her design, color, and modeling, and finally induced her to go with his sister to Palermo. Here her merit was soon recognized in a varied collection of watercolors representing flowers and fruits, which were reproduced with surpassing truth. When the School of Applied Art was instituted at Palermo in 1887, she was put in charge of the drawing, watercolor, and modeling in the women's section. She knows the flowers of various countries, those of Japan and Sicily, wonderfully well, and her fancy is inexhaustible. Her exquisite embroideries reflect this quality. She has many private pupils and is as much beloved for her character as she is admired for her talents. When she renounced Buddhism for Christianity, the Princess of Skalka was her godmother. B. Paxka Wagner, Cornelia, /B. Honorable Mention, Berlin, 1890. Born in Göttingen, 1864. She has been, in the main, her own instructor, living for some years in Rome for the purpose of study. In 1895, she settled in Berlin, where she has made a specialty of women's and children's portraits in allography and lithography. Beautiful drawings by her were exhibited at the International Watercolor Exhibition in Dresden, 1892. An interesting account of a visit to the studio of the Hungarian painter Paczka and his German wife tells of a strong series of paintings in progress there, under the general title, A Woman's Soul. In freedom and boldness of conception, they were said to remind one of Klinger, but in warmth and depth of feeling to surpass him. Frau Paczka had just finished a very large picture, representing the first couple after the expulsion from paradise. The scene is on the waste, stony slope of a mountain. The sun shines with full force in the background, while upon the unshadowed rocks of the foreground are the prostrate Adam and his wife more accusing than complaining. In 1899, Frau Paczka exhibited in Berlin Vanitas, which excels in richness of fancy and boldness of representation, while wanting somewhat in detail. The ensemble presents a remarkably fine, symbolic composition, which sets forth in rich color the dance of mankind before the golden calf, and the bitter disillusions in the struggle for fame, wealth, and happiness. Be Parlaghi, Vilma, or the Princess Elwaf. Be Great Gold Medal from the Emperor of Austria, 1890. Great Gold Medal, 1894. Small Gold Medal at Berlin, 1890, adjudged to her portrait of Windhorst. Born at Hajdúrog in 1863 and studied in Budapest, Munich, Venice, Florence, and Turin, her portraits having found great favor at the court of Berlin, she removed her studio from Munich to that capital. One of her instructors was Lenbach, and she is said by some critics to have appropriated his peculiarities as a colorist and his shortcomings in drawing, without attaining his geniality and power of divination. In 1891, her portrait of Count von Moltke, begun shortly before his death and finished afterward, was sent to the International Exposition at Berlin, but was rejected. The emperor, however, bought it for his private collection, and at his request, it was given a place of honor at the exposition, the incident causing much comment. She exhibited a portrait of the Emperor William at Berlin in 1893, which Rosenberg called careless in drawing and modeling and inconceivable in its unrefreshing dirty gray color. In January 1895, she gave an exhibition of 104 of her works, mostly portraits, including those of the Emperor, Capravi, von Moltke, and Kossuth, which had previously been exhibited in Berlin, Munich, and Paris. The proceeds of this exhibition went to the building fund of the Emperor William Memorial Church. Of a portrait exhibited in 1896, at Munich, a critic said that while it was not wholly bad, it was no better than what hundreds of others could do as well, and hundreds of others could do much better. B. Pasch Ulrich Friederike, /B, member of the Academy of Fine Arts of Sweden, born in Stockholm, 1730–1796. A portrait of Gustavus Adolphus Roman II by this artist is in the castle at Stockholm. She was a sister of Lawrence Pasch. B. Pascali Luigi, /B. This Venetian painter has exhibited in various Italian cities since 1870, when she sent a Magdalene to Parma. First Love appeared at Naples in 1877, and The Maskers Pastel at Venice in 1881. A Girl with a Cat, a Roman Girl, and A Cellar of Eggs, the latter in Venetian costume, are works of true value. Her copies of Titian's, St. Mark, and of Gian Bellini's Supper at Emmaus have attracted attention and are much esteemed. B. Pass Magdalena Vandi, /B, born at Utrecht about 1600, she died at the age of 40. This engraver was a daughter of Crispus van de Pass, the elder. She practiced her art in Germany, England, Denmark, and the Netherlands, and was important as an artist. Her engraving was exceedingly careful and skillful. Among her plates are 3 Sibyls, 1617, an Annunciation, Cephalus and Procris, Latona, and landscapes after the works of Brill, Savory, Willers, etc. B. Pattison, Helen Cyril, /B, born in Burlington, Vermont, daughter of Henry Cyril, a talented architect who moved to Rochester, New York, where his daughter spent much of her girlhood. She held the position of art teacher in a school in Batavia, New York, while still a girl herself. About 1860, she became the pupil of Herr Johann Wilhelm Preyer, the well-known painter of still life, fruit, and flowers. Preyer was a dwarf and an excellent man, but as a rule took no pupils. He was much interested in Miss Cyril and made an exception in her case. She soon acquired the technique of her master and painted much as he did, but with less minute detail, finer color, and far more sentiment. Illustration, flowers. Helen Cyril Pattison. In 1876, Miss Cyril married the artist, James William Pattison, now on the staff of the Art Institute, Chicago. After their marriage, Mr. and Mrs. Pattison resided at a Cowan near Paris. Returning to America in 1882, they spent some time in Chicago and New York City, removing to Jacksonville, Illinois, in 1884. Here Mr. Pattison was at the head of the School of Fine Arts. Mrs. Pattison lived but a few months in Jacksonville, dying in November, 1884. Mrs. Pattison's artistic reputation was well established, and her works were exhibited at the Paris Salon and in all the German cities of importance. They were frequently seen in England and at the National Academy of Design in New York. Her subjects were still life, fruit, and flowers, and her works are widely distributed. B. Pazzi, Caterina de/B, whose conventual name was Maria Maddalena, was born in Florence in 1566. It would be interesting to know the relation that this gentle lady bore to those Pazzi, who had earned a fame so unlike hers 80 years before she saw the light. Caterina de Pazzi, when a mere girl, entered a convent which stood on the site of the church known by her name in the Via Pinti. The cell of Santa Maddalena now, a chapel may still be visited. She was canonized by Pope Alexander Roman VIII. In 1670, 62 years after her death. The Florentines have many lovely legends associated with her memory. One of these relates that she painted pictures of sacred subjects when asleep. Be this as it may, we know that her pictures were esteemed in the days when the best artists lived and worked beside her. Examples of her art may still be seen in churches in Rome and Parma, as well as in the church of her native city which bears her name. B. Peel, Anna C/B, made her mark as a miniature painter and for some years was the only professional woman artist in Philadelphia. Her portrait of General Jackson made in 1819 was well considered. She also made portraits of President Monroe, Henry Clay, R.M. Johnson, John Randolph of Roanoke, and other prominent men. Miss Peel married in 1829 the Reverend William Stoughton, a Baptist clergyman, the president of the Theological College at Georgetown, Kentucky. He lived but 3 months after their marriage, and she returned to Philadelphia and again pursued her artistic labors. She married a second husband, General William Duncan, and from this time gave up professional painting. B. Peel, Sarah M/B, 1860–1885, daughter of James Peel, under whose teaching she made her first studies. She was also a pupil of her uncle, the founder of Peel's Museum, Philadelphia. Miss Peel painted portraits and spent some years in Baltimore and Washington. Among her portraits are those of Lafayette, Thomas Benton, Henry A. Wise, Caleb Cushing, and other distinguished men. From 1847, she resided in St. Louis 30 years and then went to Philadelphia. Her later works were still life subjects, especially fruits. B. Pellicci, Geertruida/B, honorary member of the Academy of Vienna. Born in Utrecht, 1744, died in Brugge, 1825, pupil of P. de Kock and Suvet. In 1753, she went to Brugge with her father and later to Paris and Vienna. She painted portraits of the Emperor Joseph Roman II and Maria Theresa, some good landscapes and animal studies. 2 of her pictures are in the museum at Brugge. B. Pellegrino, Itala/B, born at Milan, 1865, pupil of Battaglia. Her pictures are of genre and marine subjects. At the Great Exhibition at Turin, 1884, she exhibited a marine view which was bought by Prince Amadeo. Another marine view exhibited at Milan was acquired by the Società Primatrice. In 1888, she sent to the exhibition at Naples, where she resides, a view of Portici, which was added to the Royal Gallery. The excellence of her work is in the strength and certainty of touch and the sincerity and originality of composition. She has painted a marine view of Naples, in the Gulf, fair weather, and evening at sea, also a genre picture, Frusta la, which was sold while in an exhibition in Rome. B. Pennock, Clara/B, born at Berlin in 1818, where she died in 1899. She studied first with Ramay and later with Carl Begaz and Edward Magnus. Her work was largely confined to portrait and historical painting. In the gallery at Schwerin is her Elector Frederick of Saxony refusing to accept the interim. Another good example of her historical work is the reconciliation of Charlemagne with Tassilo of Bavaria. a well-known and strongly modeled portrait of Minister von Stoch and several Luther portraits, Luther's family devotion, and Luther finds the first Latin Bible show her facility in this branch of art. She also painted a Christ on the Cross. B. Pirelli, Leda, / a landscape painter living in Milan, who has become well known by pictures that have been seen at the exhibitions in several Italian cities, especially through some Roman studies that appeared at Florence and Turin in 1884. A view of Lecco, Lake Como, Castleair, and a Lombard plain are among her best works. B. Perman, Louise E. /B, born at Birkenshaw, Renfrewshire, studied in Glasgow. This artist paints roses and roses only in oils. In this art, she has been very successful. She has exhibited at the Royal Academy and the New Gallery, London, at the Royal Scottish Academy, Glasgow, at art exhibits in Munich, Dresden, Berlin, Prague, Hanover, etc., and wherever her works have been seen, they have been sold. In May 1903, a collection of 25 rose pictures were exhibited by a prominent dealer, and but few were left in his hands. A critic in the studio of April 1903, writing of the exhibition at the Ladies' Artists Club, Glasgow, says, "Miss Louise Perman's rose pictures were as refined and charming as ever. This last-named lady certainly has a remarkable power of rendering the beauties of the Queen of Flowers, whether she chooses to paint the sumptuous yellow of the Marichal Neil, the blush of the Catherine Mermet, or the crimson glory of the Queen of Autumn. She seems not only to give the richness of color and fullness of contour of the flowers, but to capture for the delight of the beholder the very spiritual essence of them." To the London Academy, 1903, she sent a picture called York and Lancaster. B. Perrier, Marie, /B mention honorable at Salon des Artistes Francais, 1899. Prix Marie Bashkirtseff, 1899. Honorable mention, Paris Exposition, 1900. Numerous medals from foreign and provincial exhibitions, medals in gold and silver at Rouen, Nimes, Rennes, etc., bronze medals at Amiens and Angers. Member of the Société des Artistes Francais, perpetual member of the Baron Taylor Association, section of the Arts of Painting, etc., born at Paris. Pupil of Benjamin Constant, Jules Lefebvre, and J.P. Laurens. Emile Perrier's picture of Jeanne d'Arc is in a provincial museum. Several pictures by her belonging to the city of Paris are scenes connected with the schools of the city, breakfast at the communal school. After school at Montmartre were at the Salon des Artistes Francais, 1903. Others are manual labor at the maternal school, flowers, and recreation of the children at the maternal school. Of the last, Gabriel Murray says, "It is one of the really good pictures in the salon." This artist decorated a villa near Nimes with 4 large panels representing the seasons, 12 small panels, the hours, and pictures of the labors of the fields, such as the gathering of grapes and picking of olives. She has painted numerous portraits of children and a series of pictures illustrating the life of the children of Paris. They are children at school and after school, children on the promenade and their games, and children at home. B. Perry, Clara Greenleaf, /B member of the Copley Society. Born at Long Branch, New Jersey. Pupil of Boston Art Museum School under Mr. Benson and Mr. Tarbell. In Paris, pupil of M. Raphael Collin and Robert Henry. Miss Perry has exhibited her portrait of Mrs. Yu in the Salon of the Société Nationale des Beaux-Arts and in Philadelphia. She paints landscapes and portraits. B. Perry, Lilla Cabot, /B, pupil in Boston of Dennis Bunker and Alfred Collins, in Paris of Alfred Stevens, Robert Fleury, Bouguereau, and Courtois, in Munich of Fritz von Eude. Mrs. Perry is essentially a portrait painter, but has painted landscapes, especially in Japan, where she spent some years. The scenery of Japan and its wonderfully beautiful Fusiyama would almost compel an artist to paint landscapes. Mrs. Perry says that her pictures of French and Japanese types are, in fact, portraits as truly as are those she is asked to paint. Her picture of a Japanese lacemaker belongs to Mr. Quincy A. Shaw. It has been much admired in the exhibitions in which it has been seen. In the watercolor exhibition of the Boston Art Club, 1903, Mrs. Perry's portrait of Miss S. attracted much attention. The delicate flesh tones, the excellent modeling of the features, and what may be called the whole atmosphere of the picture combine in producing an effective and pleasing example of portraiture. B. Perugini, Caterina E./B. an Italian painter living in London, where she frequently exhibits her excellent pictures. Among them are A Siesta, Dolce far niente, Multiplication, and portraits of Guy Cone, son of Sir Guy Campbell, Bart, and of Peggy and Kitty Hammond, two charming children. At the Academy, 1903, she exhibited Faith and Silken Tresses. B. Perugini, Mrs. Kate Dickens/B. younger daughter of Charles Dickens and wife of Charles Edward Perugini. This artist has exhibited at the Royal Academy and at other exhibitions since 1877. Her pictures are of genre subjects, such as The Doll's Dressmaker, Little Red Cap, Old Curiosity Shop, etc. At the Academy, 1903, she exhibited Some Spring Flowers. B. Peters, Anna/B. Medals at Vienna, 1873, London, 1874, Munich, 1876, Amsterdam and Antwerp, 1877. Born at Mannheim, 1843. Pupil of her father, Pieter Francis Peters, in Stuttgart. Miss Peters traveled over Europe and was commissioned to decorate apartments in the royal castles at Stuttgart and Friedrichshafen. Her picture of Roses and Grapes is in the National Gallery, London, and one of Autumn Flowers in the museum at Stuttgart. B. Pellini, Margherita/B. an Italian painter living in Paris. Her most successful exhibitions have been those at Rome in 1883, when her Silk Cocoon Carter of Quimper and Charity appeared, and at Turin in 1884, when The Three Ages, The Poor Blind Man, and a portrait of the Prince of Naples were shown, all exquisite in sentiment and excellent in execution. The Silk Cocoon Carter of Quimper has been thus noticed by de Rengis. If I am not mistaken, Signora Margherita Pellini has also taken this road, full of modernity, but not free from great danger. Her Silk Cocoon Carter is touched with great disdain for every suggestion of the old school. Rare worth it is that a young woman should be carried by natural inclination into such care for detail. B. Pintosezzi, Ida/B. Silver Medal at the Beatrice Exposition, Florence, 1890. Since 1882, pictures by this artist have been seen in various Italian exhibitions. In the Beatrice of that year she exhibited Coxiara, and in 1887, a Friar Cook. Her Fortune Teller attracted general attention at Venice in 1887. This artist has also given some time to the decoration of terracotta in oil colors. An amphora decorated with landscape and figures was exhibited at the Promotrice in Florence in 1889 and much admired. B. Poeting, Countess Adrian/B. born in Crudum, Bohemia, 1856. The effect of her thorough training under Blas, Strasgeripka, and Fritjof Smith is seen in her portraits of the deputy burgomaster Franz Kuhm, which is in the Rathaus, Vienna, as well as in those of the Princess Frieda von Oldenburg and the writer, Bertha von Suttner. Her excellence is also apparent in her genre subjects, in The Land of Dreams being an excellent example of these. B. Popert, Charlotte/B. Silver Medal at the Beatrice, Florence, 1890, born in Hamburg, 1848. Pupil in Weimar of the elder Preller and Karl Goertz, of P. Joris in Rome and Bonnet in Paris. After extensive travels in the Orient, England, the Netherlands, and Spain, she established herself in Rome and painted chiefly in watercolors. Her Praying Women of Bethlehem is an excellent example of her art. In 1883, she exhibited at Rome, in the Temple at Bethlehem, at Turin in 1884, in the 17th century, and The Nun, at Venice in 1887, an exquisite portrait in watercolors. B. Popluderitz, Elizabeth/B. Honorable Mention, Berlin, 1891. For the second time, only the Senate of the Berlin Academy conferred this distinction upon a woman. The artist exhibited two portraits, painted with Holbein-like delicacy and truthfulness, if we may agree with the critics. This artist was born in Berlin in 1858 and was a pupil of Gusso. Her best pictures are portraits, but her Sappho and Euphrosyne are excellent works. B. Pop Babette/B. born in Regensburg, 1800, died about 1840, made her studies in Munich. In the Cathedral of Regensburg is her Adoration of the Kings. B. Powell, Caroline A/B. Bronze Medal at Chicago, 1893, Silver Medal at Buffalo, 1901. member of the Society of American Wood Engravers and of the Boston Society of Arts and Crafts, born in Dublin, Ireland, pupil of W. J. Linton and Timothy Cole. Illustration, Doge's Palace, Venice. Saint Christopher, engraved by Caroline A. Powell. Miss Powell was an illustrator of the Century magazine from 1880 to 1895. The engraving After the Resurrection by John Lafarge in the Church of St. Thomas, New York, is the work of this artist. She also illustrated Engravings on Wood by William M. Laffan, in which book her work is commended. Miss Powell is now employed by Messrs. Houghton, Mifflin & Co. and writes me, "So far as I know, I am, at present, the only woman in America engaged in the practice of engraving as a fine art." B. Prestel, Maria Katharina /B, family name B. Hall, /B, born in Nuremberg, 1747. Her husband, Johann Prestel, was her teacher, and she was of great assistance in the work which he produced at Frankfurt on the Main in 1783. In 1786, however, she separated from him and went to London, where she devoted herself to aquatints. She executed more than 70 plates, some of them of great size. B. Prestel, Ursula Magdalena /B, born in Nuremberg, 1777–1845, daughter of the preceding artist. She worked in Frankfurt and London, traveled in France and Switzerland, and died in Brussels. Her moonlight scenes, some of her portraits, and her picture of the Falls of the Rhine near Laufen are admirable. B. Priuschen, Hermann von Schmidt /B, married name Tellmann, born at Darmstadt, 1857, pupil of Ferdinand Keller in Karlsruhe, traveled in Spain, France, Italy, the Netherlands, and Denmark. She remained some time in Munich, Berlin, and Rome, establishing her studio in these cities and painting a variety of subjects. Her flower pictures are her best works. Her Mors Imperator created a sensation by reason of its striking qualities rather than by intrinsic artistic merit. In the gallery at Metz is her picture of Irene von Spillenberg on the funeral gondola. In 1883, she exhibited in Rome, Answered, a study of thistles, in Autumn, a variety of fruits, and Questions, a charming study of carnations. At Berlin in 1890, Meadow Saffron and Cineraria was praised for its glowing color and artistic arrangement. A Viennese critic the same year lamented that an artist of so much talent should paint lifeless objects only. In Berlin, in 1894, she held an exhibition in which her landscapes and flower pieces were better than her still-life pictures. Frau Priuschen is also a musician and poet. The painting of flower pieces is a delightful art for man or woman, but so many such pictures which are by amateurs are seen in exhibitions too good to be refused, but not of a satisfactory quality that one can scarcely sympathize with the critic who would have MME. Priuschen paint other subjects than these charming blossoms, so exquisite in form and color, into which she paints so much delightful sentiment. B. Puchen, Sophie, /B, born at Nuremberg, 1864. This artist studied in Paris and Munich and resides in the latter city. At the International Exhibition, Vienna, 1894, her portrait of a lady drinking tea was praised by the critics without exception, and in fact her portraits are always well considered. That she is also skillful in etching was shown in her Forsaken, exhibited in 1896. B. Putnam, Sarah Gould, /B, member of the Copley Society. Born in Boston, pupil in Boston and New York of J. B. Johnston, F. Duveneck, Abbott Thayer, and William Chase, in Scheveningen of Bart J. Blommers, and in Munich of Wilhelm Durr. Miss Putnam's portrait of Hun. John Lowell is in the District Courtroom in Post Office Building, Boston. That of William G. Russell in the Law Library in the Courthouse, Pemberton Square, same city. That of General Charles G. Loring, for many years director of Boston Museum of Fine Arts, belongs to his family. Among her other portraits are those of Dr. Henry P. Bowditch, Francis Boot, George Partridge Bradford, Edward Silsby, Mrs. Essagre, and Lauren Deland. In addition to the above, she has painted more than 100 portraits of men, women, and children, which belong to the families of the subjects. B. Pirach, MME, Elise, /B, born in Dresden, 1828, resided in Lyon, France, where she was a pupil of the fine colorist Simon St. Jean. MME, Pirach excelled her master in the arrangement of flowers in her pictures and in the correctness of her drawing, while she acquired his harmonious color. Her picture called the Tom Wreath, painted in 1850, is in the Dresden Gallery. B. Questier, Catherine, /B. born in Amsterdam. In 1655, she published 2 comedies which were illustrated by engravings of her own design and execution. She achieved a good reputation for painting, copper engraving, and modeling in wax, as well as for her writings. B. Rob Doris, /B. third-class medal, Nuremberg, also second-class medal, 1892. Born in Nuremberg, 1851. Pupil of her father, Johann Leonhard Rob, in etching and engraving. She has engraved many works by Rubens, Van Dyck, and Cuyp. Among her plates after works of more recent artists are Pilates, Death Warrant of Mary Stuart, Lindenschmidt's In Thought, and Lofberger's Hunting Fanfare. This artist resides in Munich. B. Radowska, Baroness Annetta /B. of Milan. Her interesting genre pictures are seen in most of the Italian exhibitions. Old Wine, Young Wife was at Milan, 1881, in same city, 1883, and Aggression, The Visit, The Betrothed. She also sent to Rome in 1883 2 pictures, one of which, The Harem, was especially noteworthy. In 1884, at Turin, she exhibited Tea and the Four Ages. These were excellent in tone and technique and attractive in subject. At Milan, 1886, her Will He Arrive was heartily commended in the art journals. B. Ray Henrietta, /B.C. Normand, Mrs. Ernest. B. Ragusa Eleonora, /B.C. Otama. B. Rapin, Aimé, /B. at the Swiss National Exposition, 1896. A large picture of a Genovese watchmaker by this artist was purchased by the government and is in the museum at Neuchâtel. In 1903, the city of Geneva commissioned her to paint a portrait of Philippe Plantamer, which is in the Museum Mon Repos at Geneva. Member of the Société des Beaux-Arts of Lausanne, Société des Femmes Painters et Sculpteurs de la Suisse Romande, Société de l'Exposition Permanente des Beaux-Arts, Geneva. Born at Payerne, Canton de Vaud. Studied at Geneva under M. Hebert and Barthélemy Men, in painting, Hugues Bovy, modeling. Illustration, in the museum at Neuchâtel. Genovese watchmaker. Aimé Rapin. Emile Rapin writes me, I am above all a portrait painter and my portraits are in private hands. She names among others of her sitters Ernest Naville, the philosopher, Réal Pictet, chemist, Jules Salmson, sculptor, etc. She mentions that she painted a portrait of the present Princess of Wales at the time of her marriage, but as it was painted from photographs, the artist has no opinion about its truth to life. Emile Rapin has executed many portraits of men, women, and children in Paris, London, and Germany, as well as in Switzerland. She refers me to the following account of herself and her art. In the studio of April, 1903 R. M. writes, the subject of these notes is a striking example of the compensations of nature for her apparent cruelty, also of what the genuine artist is capable of achieving notwithstanding the most singular disadvantages. Some years ago in the little town of Payerne, Canton Vaud, a child was born without arms. One day the mother, while standing near a rose bush with her infant in her arms, was astonished to observe one of its tiny toes clasp the stem of the rose. Little did she guess at the time that these prehensile toes were destined one day to serve an artist, in the execution of her work, with the same marvelous facility as hands. As the child grew up, the greatest care was bestowed upon her education. She early manifested unmistakable artistic promise, and at the age of 16 was sent to the École des Beaux-Arts, Geneva, for reasons already mentioned. Emile Rapin holds a unique position amongst that valiant and distinguished group of Swiss lady artists to whose work we hope to have the opportunity of referring. She is a fine example of that singleness of devotion which characterizes the born artist. Her art is the all-absorbing interest of her life. It is not without its limitations, but within these limitations the artist has known how to be true to herself. Drawing her inspiration direct from nature, she has held on her independent way, steadily faithful to the gift she possesses of evoking a character in a portrait or of making us feel how the common task, when representative of genuine human effort and touched with the poetry of national tradition, of religion, and of nature, becomes a subject of noble artistic treatment. She has kept unimpaired that merveilleux frisson de sensibilité, which is one of the most precious gifts of the artistic temperament, and which is quick to respond to the ideal in the real. There are some artists who, though possessed of extraordinary mastery over the materials of their art, bring to their work a spirit which beggars and belittles both art and life. There are others who seem to work with an ever-present sense of the noble purpose of their vocation and the pathos and dignity of existence. Emil. Rapin belongs to the second category. Her El Horloger is an example of this. A Genovese watchmaker is bending to his work at a bench covered with tools. Through the window of the workshop one perceives in the blue distance Mont Saleve, and nearer the time-honored towers of the Cathedral of St. Pierre. Here is a composition dealing with simple life, a composition which, from the point of execution, color, and harmony of purpose, leaves little or nothing to be desired. But this is not all. It is, so to speak, an artistic resume of the life and history of the old city, and that strongly portrayed national type gathers dignity from his alliance with the generations who helped to make one of the main interests of the city, and from his relationship to that eventful past suggested by the cathedral and the mountain. Emil Rapin is unmistakably one of the best Swiss portraitists, working for the most part in pastels, her medium by predilection. She has at the same time modeled portraits in bas-relief. We are not only impressed by the intensely living quality of her work as a portraitist, but by the extraordinary power with which she has seized and expressed the individual character and history of each of her subjects. Emil Rapin has exhibited her works with success in Paris, Munich, and Berlin. The few specimens of her bas-reliefs which I have seen prove that did she prefer the art of sculpture before that of painting, she would be as successful with her modeling tools as she has been with her brush. B. Rappard Clara von /B second-class medal, London, born at Weyburn near Bern, 1857. After studying with Skudelsky and Dreber, she worked under Gusso in Berlin. She spent some time in travel, especially in Germany and Italy, and then, choosing Interlaken as her home, turned her attention to the illustration of books, as well as to portrait and genre painting. In the museum at Freiburg is her Point Lace Maker. A series of 16 fantasies by this artist has been published in Munich. B. Rath Henriette /B honorary member of the Société des Arts, 1801. Born in 1772, she died in 1856 at Genf, where, with her sister, she founded the Musée Rath. She studied under Iseby and was well and favorably known as a portrait and enamel painter. B. Ream Vinny /B. C. Hoxie. B. Redmond Frietta Volter /B medal at the Columbian Exhibition, Chicago, member of the Women's Art Club. Born in Thun, Switzerland. Studies made in Switzerland and in Paris. A painter of flowers and still life. Mrs. Redmond is a Swiss woman, now residing in New York. She has exhibited her works in the Paris Salon, in the National Academy of Design, at the Society of American Artists exhibitions, etc., and was awarded a medal at the World's Fair in Chicago. Her work is not only skillful and accurate in description and characterization, it is done with breadth and freedom and given a quality of fine decorative distinction. Her subjects are roses, cyclamen, chrysanthemums, nasturtiums, double larkspurs, cineraria, etc., and she makes each panel a distinct study in design, with a background and accessories of appropriate character. For example, the 3 or 4 large panels of roses painted at Mentone have a glimpse of the Mediterranean for background, and a suggestion of trellis work for the support of the vine or bush. And in another rose panel, we have a tipped-over Gibraltar basket with its luscious contents strewed about in artful confusion. The double larkspurs make very charming panels for decorative purposes. They are painted with delightful fullness of color and engaging looseness and crispness of touch. Boston Transcript. B. Regis, Emma, /B. This Roman painter has given special attention to figures and has executed a number of portraits, one of the best of which is that of the Marchioness Durazzo Pallavicini. She has exhibited some delightful work at Turin and at Rome, such as The Lute Player, All is Not Gold That Glitters, Humanity, and In a Low Tempor. B. Reinhardt, Sophie, /B. Born at Kirchberg, 1775, died at Karlsruhe, 1843, pupil of Becker. She traveled in Austro-Hungary and Italy. In the Kunsthalle at Karlsruhe is her picture of Saint Elizabeth and the child John. Among her best works are The Death of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, The Death of Tasso, and 12 illustrations for a volume of Hebel's poems. B. Ramai Marie, /B. Born in Berlin, 1829. Daughter of Professor August Ramai of the Berlin Academy. pupil of her father, Hermann Stilk, and Theud Gronlund. She traveled extensively in several European countries, making special studies in flowers and still life, from which many of her watercolors were painted. 20 of these are in the Berlin National Gallery. B. Reuter Elizabeth, / born in Lübeck, 1853, pupil of Zimmermann in Munich, A. Schleicher in Hamburg, and of H. Eschke in Berlin. She also went to Dusseldorf to work in the gallery there. Later, she traveled in Scandinavia. Her best pictures are landscapes. Among them is a charming series of 6 watercolors of views in the park of Friedrichsruh. B. Revest Cornelia Louisa, / B. second-class medals in 1819 and 1831 in Paris. Born in Amsterdam, 1795, died in Paris, 1856. Pupil of Serengeli and Vafflard in Paris. In 1814, she painted a Magdalene at the feet of Christ for a church in Marseille. She also painted many good portraits and a picture called The Young Mother Playing the Mandolin. B. Richard MME. Hortense, / B. Honorable Mention, Exposition of 1889 third-class medal 1892, silver medals at Antwerp and Barcelona and gold medal in London. Born at Paris 1860, pupil of James Bertrand, Jules Lefebvre and Bouguereau, has exhibited regularly since 1875. Her picture of Cinderella is in the Museum of Poitiers. At Church in Poitou is in the Luxembourg. She has painted many portraits. B. Richards Anna Mary, / B. Norman Dodge Prize, National Academy, New York 1890. Member of the 91 Art Club, London. Born at Germantown, Pennsylvania, 1870. Pupil of Dennis Bunker in Boston, H. Siddons Mowbray and Lafarge in New York, Benjamin Constant and J. P. Laurens in Paris, and always of her father, W. T. Richards. Miss Richards' work is varied. She is fond of color when suited to her subject. She also works much in black and white. When representing nature, she is straightforward in her rendering of its aspects and moods, but she also loves the symbolic expression of emotion and the so-called allegorical subjects. The artist writes, "I simply work in the way that at the moment it seems to me fitting to work to express the thing I have in mind. Where the object of the picture is one sort of quality, I use the method that seems to me to emphasize that quality." When but 14 years old, this artist exhibited at the National Academy, New York, a picture of waves, The Wild Horses of the Sea, which was immediately sold and a duplicate ordered. In England, Miss Richards has exhibited at the Academy, and her pictures have been selected for exhibitions in provincial galleries. Miss Richards is earnestly devoted to her art, and has in mind an end toward which she diligently strives not to become a painter distinguished for clever mannerism, but to attain a definite end, one which is difficult to reach and requires widely applied effort. Judging from what she has already done at her age, one may predict her success in her chosen method. In February 1903, Miss Richards and her father exhibited their works in the No galleries. I quote a few press opinions. Illustration, May Day at Whitelands College, Chelsea. Anna M. Richards. Miss Richards paints the sea well. She infuses interest into her figures. She has a love of allegory. Her studies in Holland and Norway are interesting. Her Whitby, lighted by sunset, with figures massed in the streets in dark relief against it, is beautiful. Her Friends, showing 2 women watching the twilight fading from the summits of a mountain range, the cedared slopes and river valley below meantime gathering blueness and shadow, is of such strength and sweetness of fancy that it affects one like a strain of music. Miss Richards becomes symbolic or realistic by turn. Some of her figures are creatures of the imagination, winged and iridescent, like the spirit of hope. Again, she paints good, honest Dutchmen, loafing about the docks. Sometimes she has recourse to poetry and quotes Emerson for a title. If technically she is not always convincing, it is apparent that the artist is doing some thinking for herself, and her endeavors are in good taste. Miss Richards has written Letter and Spirit, containing 57 dramatic sonnets of inward life. These she has illustrated by 60 full-page pictures. Of these drawings, the eminent artist, G.F. Watts, says, "In imaginative comprehension they are more than illustrations, they are interpretations. I find in them an assemblage of great qualities, beauty of line, unity and abundance in composition, variety and appreciation of natural effects, with absence of manner. Also unusual qualities in drawing, neither academical nor eccentrical, carried out with great purity and completeness. B. Richards, Signora Emma Gaggiati, /B. Rome. B. Ries, Therese Fedorona, /B. Bronze medal at Ekaterinburg, Carl Ludwig gold medal Vienna, gold medal, Paris Exposition 1900. Officer of the Academy. Born in Moscow. Pupil of the Moscow Academy and of Professor Helmer, Vienna, women not being admitted to the Vienna Academy. A critic in the Studio of July, 1901, who signs his article ASL, writes as follows of this remarkable artist. Not often does it fall to the lot of a young artist to please both critic and public at the same time, and, having gained their interest, to continue to fill their expectations. But it was so with Fedorona Ries, a young Russian artist who some 8 months ago had never even had a piece of clay in her hand, but who, by dint of self, now stands amongst the foremost of her profession. It was chance that led Miss Ries to the brush, and another chance which led her to abandon the brush for the chisel. 5 years ago, she was awarded the Carl Ludwig gold medal for her Lucifer, and at the last Paris exhibition, she gained the gold medal for her Unbesiegbaren, the Unconquerable. Miss Ries was born and educated in Moscow, but Vienna is the city of her adoption. She first studied painting at the Moscow Academy, her work there showing great breadth of character and power of delineation. At the yearly exhibition in Moscow, held some 5 months after she had entered as a student, she took the gold medal for her Portrait of a Russian Peasant. She then abandoned painting for sculpture, and 1 month later gained the highest commendations for a bust of Ariadne. She then began to study the plastic art from life. Dissatisfied with herself, although her somnambulist gained a prize, Miss Ries left Moscow for Paris, but on her way stayed in Vienna, studying under Professor Helmer. 1 year later, at the Vienna Spring Exhibition, she exhibited her Die Hex. Here is no traditional witch, though the broomstick on which she will ride through the air is an evidence. She is a demoniac being, knowing her own power and full of devilish instinct. The marble is full of life, and one seems to feel the warmth of her delicate, powerfully chiseled, though soft and pliable limbs. Die Unbesiegbaren is a most powerful work, and stood out in the midst of the sculpture at Paris in 1900, with the prominence imparted by unusual power in the perception of the whole of a subject, and the skill to render the perception so that others realize its full meaning. There are 4 figures in this group, men drawing a heavy freight boat along the shore by means of a tow line passed round their bodies, on which they throw their weight in such a way that their legs, pressed together, lose their outline except in the case of the leader end, are as a mass of power. They also pull on the line with their hands. The leader bends over the rope until he looks down. The man behind him raises his head and looks up with an appealing expression. The 2 others behind are exerting all their force in pulling on the rope, but have twisted the upper part of the body in order to look behind and watch the progress of their great burden. There is not the least resemblance of one to the other, either in feature or expression, and to me, it would seem that the woman who had conceived and executed this group might well be content to rest on her laurels. But an artistic creator who is really inspired with his art and not with himself is never satisfied. He presses on and on sometimes after he has expressed the best of his talent. This is not yet reached, I believe, by Miss Ries, and we shall see still greater results of her inspiration. The Austrian government commissioned this artist to execute the figure of a saint. One may well prophesy that there will be nothing conventional in this work. She has already produced a striking Saint Barbara. Her portrait busts include those of Professor Weger, Professor Helmer, Mark Twain, Countess Kinsky, Countess Palfs, Baron Berger, and many others. B. Ridutine, Alyssa, /B. a bronze and a gold medal at the Beatrice Exposition, Florence, 1890. Born in Florence, where she resides and devotes herself to painting in imitation of old tapestries. An excellent example of her work is in watercolors and is called The Gardener's Children. In 1888 and 1889, she exhibited The Coronation of Esther and a picture of oleanders. B. Roberts, Elizabeth Wentworth, /B. B. Robinson, Mrs. Imogen Morrill, /B. medals at the Mechanics' Fair, Boston, and at the Centennial Exhibition, Philadelphia, 1876. Born in Attleboro, Massachusetts. Pupil of Camphossen in Dusseldorf and of Couture in Paris, where she resided several years. Among her important works are the first battle between the Puritans and Indians and Washington and his staff welcoming a provision train, both at Philadelphia. Mrs. Morrill continued to sign her pictures with her maiden name, Imogen Robinson. A critic of the New York Evening Post said of her pictures at Philadelphia, "In the painting of the horses, Mrs. Morrill has shown great knowledge of their action, and their finish is superb. The work is painted with great strength throughout, and its solidity and forcible treatment will be admired by all who take an interest in Revolutionary history. In the drawing of the figures of Standish and the chief at his side, and the dead and dying savages, there is a fine display of artistic power, and the grouping of the figures is masterly. In color, the works are exceedingly brilliant." B. Robusti, Marietta, /B. born in Venice, 1560–1590. The parentage of this artist would seem to promise her talent and ensure its culture. She was the daughter of Jacopo Robusti, better known as Il Tintoretto, who has been called the thunder of art, and who avowed his ambition to equal the drawing of Michelangelo and the coloring of Titian. The portrait of Marietta Robusti proves her to have been justly celebrated for her beauty. Her face is sweet and gentle in expression. She was sprightly in manner and full of enthusiasm for anything that interested and attracted her. She had a good talent for music and a charming voice in singing. Her father's fondness for her made him desire her constant companionship, and at times he permitted her to dress as a boy and share with him certain studies that she could only have made in this disguise. Tintoretto carefully cultivated the talents of his daughter, and some of the portraits she painted did her honor. That of Marco dei Vescovi first turned public attention to her artistic merits. The beard was especially praised, and it was even said by good judges that she equaled her father. Indeed, her works were so enthusiastically esteemed by some critics that it is difficult to make a just estimate of her as an artist. But we are assured of her exquisite taste in the arrangement of her pictures and of the rare excellence of her coloring. It soon became the fashion in the aristocratic circles of Venice to sit for portraits to this fascinating artist. Her likeness of Jacopo Strada, the antiquarian, was considered a worthy gift for the Emperor Maximilian, and a portrait of Marietta was hung in the chamber of His Majesty, Maximilian Philip Roman II, of Spain, and the Archduke Ferdinand, each in turn invited Marietta to be the painter of his court. Tintoretto could not be induced to be separated from his daughter, and the honors she received so alarmed him that he hastened to marry her to Mario Augusti, a wealthy German jeweler, upon the condition that she should remain at home. But the monarch who asks no consent and heeds no refusal claimed this daughter so beloved. She died at 30, and it is recorded that both her father and her husband mourned for her so long as they lived. Marietta was buried in the church of Santa Maria del Orto, where, within sight of her tomb, are several of her father's pictures. Tintoretto painting his daughter's portrait after her death has been the subject of pictures by artists of various countries, and has lost nothing of its poetic and pathetic interest in the 3 centuries and more that have elapsed since that day, when the brave old artist painted the likeness of all that remained to him of his idolized child. B. Rocci, Linda, /B. born in Florence. She resides in Geneva. 2 of her flower pieces in watercolor were seen at the Fine Arts Exposition, Milan, 1881. In 1883, also in Milan, she exhibited a wedding garland, hawthorn, etc. The constantly increasing brilliancy of her work was shown in 3 pictures, flowers in watercolors, seen at the Milan Exposition, 1886. To Vienna, 1887, she sent 4 pictures of wild flowers, which were much admired. B. Rocco, Lily Rosalia, /B. honorable mention, a bronze medal and 4 silver medals were accorded this artist at the Institute of Fine Arts in Naples, where she studied from 1880 to 1886 and was also a pupil of Solari. Born in Mazzara del Vallo, Sicily, 1863. In 1886 she exhibited at Naples Carifiori, at Palermo Flora, and in Rome a Sicilian Contadina. In 1888 her picture, Spring, was exhibited in London. 2 of her works were in the Simonti Exposition, 1889, one being a marine view from her birthplace. She has painted many portraits, both in oils and watercolors, and has been appointed a teacher in at least 2 government schools in Naples. B. Rodiana, Onorata, /B. was a contemporary of the saintly Caterina de Vigri, but was of quite another order of women. She had one quality which, if not always attractive, at least commands attention. She was unique, since we know of no other woman who was at the same time a successful artist and a valiant soldier. Born in Castiglione near Cremona, early in the 15th century, she was known as a reputable artist while still young, and was commissioned to decorate the palace of the tyrant, Gabbrino Fondolo, at Cremona. The girlish painter was beautiful in person, frank and engaging in manner, and most attractive to the gentlemen of the tyrant's court. One day, when alone and absorbed in the execution of a wall painting, a dissolute young noble addressed her with insulting freedom. She could not escape, and in the struggle which ensued, she drew a dagger and stabbed her assailant to the heart. Rushing from the palace, she disguised herself in male attire and fled to the mountains, where she joined a company of condottieri. She soon became so good a soldier that she was made an officer of the band. Fondolo raged as tyrants are wont to do, both on account of the murderer and of the escape. He vowed the direst vengeance on Onorata if ever she were again in his power. Later, when his anger had cooled and he had no other artist at command who could worthily complete her decorations, he published her pardon and summoned her to return to his service. Onorata completed her work, but her new vocation held her with a potent spell, and henceforth she led a divided life, never entirely relinquishing her brush and remaining always a soldier. When Castiglione was besieged by the Venetians, Onorata led her band thither and was victorious in the defense of her birthplace. She was fatally wounded in this action and died soon after, in the midst of the men and women whose homes she had saved. They loved her for her bravery and deeply mourned the sacrifice of her life. Few stories from real life are so interesting and romantic as this, yet little notice has been taken of Onorata's talent or of her prowess, while many less spirited and unusual lives have been commemorated in prose and poetry. B. Rodriguez de Taro, Luisa, /B. Honorable Mention, Madrid, 1856, for a picture of Queen Isabel the Catholic reading with Dona Beatriz de Galindo. Honorable Mention, 1860, for her Boabdil returning from prison. Born in Madrid, a descendant of the Counts of Los Villars and wife of the Count of Mirasol, pupil of Carlos Ribera. B. Ronner, MME, Henriette, /B. Medals and honorable mentions and elections to academies have been showered on MME, Ronner all over Europe. The King of Belgium decorated her with the Cross of the Order of Leopold, born in Amsterdam in 1821. The grandfather of this artist was Nicolas Frederick Nip, a flower painter. Her father, Josephus Augustus Nip, a landscape painter, went blind, and after this misfortune was the teacher of his daughter. Her aunt, for whom she was named, received medals in Paris and Amsterdam for her flower pictures. What could Henriette Nip do except paint pictures? Hers was a clear case of predestination. At all events, almost from babyhood, she occupied herself with her pencil, and when she was 12 years old, her blind father began to teach her. Even at 6 years of age, it was plainly seen that she would be a painter of animals. When 16, she exhibited a cat in a window, and from that time was considered a reputable artist. In 1850, she was married and settled in Brussels. From this time, for 15 years, she painted dogs almost without exception. Her picture, called Friend of Man, was exhibited in 1850. It is her most famous work and represents an old sand seller, whose dog, still harnessed to the little sand wagon, is dying, while 2 other dogs are looking on with well-defined sympathy. It is a most pathetic scene, wonderfully rendered. About 1870, she devoted herself to pictures of cats, in which specialty of art she has been most important. In 1876, however, she sent to the Philadelphia Exposition a picture of setter dogs. A cart drawn by dogs is in the museum at Hanover. Dog and Pigeon, in the Stettin Museum, Coming from Market, is in a private collection in San Francisco. MME, Ronner has invented a method of posing cats that is ingenious and of great advantage. To the uninitiated, it would seem that one could only take the portrait of a sleeping cat, so untiring are the little beasts in their gymnastic performances. But MME. Ronner, having studied them with infinite patience, proceeded to arrange a glass box, in which, on a comfortable cushion, she persuades her cats to assume the positions she desires. This box is enclosed in a wire cage, and from the top of this she hangs some cat attraction, upon which the creature bounds and shows those wonderful antics that the artist has so marvelously reproduced in her painting. MME. Ronner has two favorite models, Gem and Monmouth. The last name is classical, since the cat of Mother Mitchell has been made immortal. Miss Winslow, in Concerning Cats, says that MME. Ronner excels all other cat painters, living or dead. She not only infuses a wonderful degree of life into her little figures, but reproduces the shades of expression, shifting and variable as the sands of the sea, as no other artist of the brush has done. Asleep or awake, her cats look to the felonarian like cats with whom he or she is familiar. Curiosity, drowsiness, indifference, alertness, love, hate, anxiety, temper, innocence, cunning, fear, confidence, mischief, earnestness, dignity, helplessness, they are all in MME. Ronner's cats' faces, just as we see them in our own cats. It is but a short time ago that MME. Ronner was still painting in Brussels and had not only cats, but a splendid black dog and a cockatoo to bear her company, while her son is devoted to her. Her house is large and her grounds pleasant, and her 80 years did not prevent her painting several hours a day, and, like some other ladies of whom we know, she was 80 years young. The editor of the Magazine of Art, M. H. Spielman, in an article on the Royal Academy Exhibition, 1903, writes, "What the dog is to Mr. Riviere, to Madame Ronner is the cat. With what unerring truth she records delightful kittenly nature, the feline nobility of haughty indifference to human approval or discontent, the subtlety of expression and drawing of heads and bodies, the exact quality and tone of the fur, the expressive eloquence of the tail. With all her 80 years, Madame Ronner's hand, vision, and sensibility have not diminished, only her sobriety of color seems to have increased. Her pictures of this year were called The Ladybird and Coaxing. To the exhibition of the Beaux Arts in Brussels, 1903, MME. Ronner sent pictures of cats, full of life and mischief. B. Rosenboom, Marguerite Vogel, /B second-class medal, Munich, 1892. Born in 1843 and died in 1896, near The Hague. She spent a large part of her life near Utrecht, devoting herself mainly to the painting of flowers. One of her works is in the Royal Museum at Amsterdam, and another in the museum at Breslau. B. Rope, Ellen M. /B. This English sculptor executed 4 large panels for the Women's Building at the Chicago Exhibition. They represented faith, hope, charity, and heavenly wisdom. They are now in the Ladies' Dwelling, Cherry Street, London. A memorial by her is in Salisbury Cathedral. Her reliefs of children are, however, her best works. That of a boy on a dolphin is most attractive. Christ blessing little children is charmingly rendered. At the Academy, 1903, she exhibited a panel for an organ chamber, in low relief. B. Rosa, Aniela D. B. 1613-1649. A pupil in Naples of Stanziani, who, by reason of her violent death, has been called the Neapolitan Serrani. She acquired a good reputation as a historical painter and doubtless had unusual talent, but as she worked in conjunction with Stanziani and with her husband, Agostino Beltrano, it is difficult to speak of works entirely her own. 2 pictures that were acknowledged to be hers represented the birth and death of the Virgin. These were praised and were at one time in a church in Naples, but in a recent search for them I was unable to satisfy myself that the pictures I saw were genuine. Another pupil in the studio of Stanziani was the Beltrano whom Aniela married. He painted in fresco, Aniela in oils, and they were frequently employed together. The fine picture of San Biagio in the church of Santa Maria della Sanità was one of their joint works. Their early married life was very happy, but Aniela was beautiful and Beltrano grew jealous. It is said without cause, through the influence of a woman who loved him and hated Aniela. And in spite of the efforts she made to merit her husband's confidence, his distrust of her increased. Her base rival, by her art and falsehood, finally succeeded in convincing Beltrano that Aniela was unworthy, and in his rage he fatally stabbed her, when, at 36, she was in the prime of her beauty and talent. She survived long enough to convince her husband of her innocence and to pardon him for his crime, but he fled from Italy and lived the life of an outcast during 10 years. He then returned to Naples, where after 7 years, tormented by remorse, death came to his release. Domnacide generously praised the works of Aniela and quoted her master, Stanziani, as saying that she was the equal of the best painters of her time. B. Rosalba/B.C. Carriera. B. Rossi Properzia de/B. born in Bologna, 1490–1530. This artist was the first woman to succeed as a sculptor whose works can still be seen. Pupil of Raimondi, she was more or less influenced by Tribolo. In the Church of San Petronio, in her native city in the 11th chapel, is a beautiful bas-relief of two angels, executed by Properzia. They are near Tribolo's Ascension. A relief and a portrait bust in the same church are also ascribed to her. Her first work in sculpture was a minute representation of the crucifixion on a peach stone. The executioners, women, soldiers, and disciples were all represented in this infinitesimal space. She also inserted in a coat of arms a double-headed eagle in silver filigree, 11 peach stones on each side, one set representing 11 apostles with an article of the creed underneath, the other set 11 virgins with the name of a saint and her special attribute on each. Some of these intaglios are still in a private collection in Bologna. At length Properzia saw the folly of thus belittling her talent, and when the façade of San Petronio was to be enriched with sculpture, she asked for a share in the work and presented a bust she had made as a pledge of her ability. She was appointed to execute a portion of the decorations. She made a bas-relief, the subject being Joseph and Potiphar's wife, which Vasari called a lovely picture, sculptured with womanly grace and more than admirable. By this time, the jealousy of other artists was aroused, and a story was diligently repeated to the effect that Properzia loved a young nobleman who did not care for her, and that the above work, so much admired, represented her own passion. Albertini and other artists waged an absolute crusade against her, and so influenced the superintendents of the church that Properzia was obliged to leave the work, and her relief was never put in place. Through mortification and grief her health failed, and she died when but 40 years old. In spite of her persecution, she was known in all Italy, not only for her sculpture, but for her copperplate engraving and etching. When Pope Clement Roman VII went to Bologna for the coronation of Charles V, he asked for Properzia, only to hear that she had been buried that very week. Her story has been told by Vasari and other writers. She was handsome, accomplished in music, distinguished for her knowledge of science, and withal a good and orderly housewife. Well calculated to awaken the envy, not of women only, but also of men. Canova ardently admired the work of Properzia that remained in his day, and esteemed her early death as one of the chief misfortunes to the advance of the fine arts in Italy. B. Rotke, Baroness Hannah/B. born at Czernowitz in 1857. She studied portrait painting under Blaas, Swerts, and Trentino, and has worked principally in Vienna. Her portrait of Freiherr von Sterneck is in the Military Academy at Wiener Neustadt. B. Rutter, MME. D/B. This lady has made an art of her embroidery, and may be said to have revived this decorative specialty, and to have equaled the ancient productions which are so beautiful and valuable. After her marriage to the well-known sculptor, this gifted couple began their collaboration. M. P. Verneuil, in Brush and Pencil, November 1903, writes, "The first result of this joint work was shown in 1894 at the Exposition Circle pour l'Art, in the form of a panel, called The Eagle and the Swan. It was exhibited afterward at the Secession in Vienna, where it was purchased by a well-known amateur and connoisseur. Other works were produced in succession, each more interesting than its predecessor. Not daunted by difficulties that would have discouraged the most ambitious and audacious craftswoman, MME, de Rutter took for a subject the Fates to decorate a screen. Aside from the artistic interest attaching to this work, it is remarkable for another quality. The artist yielded to the instinctive liking that she had for useful art. She ornamented a useful article, and, in mastering the technical difficulties of her work, she created the new method called re-embroidery. For the dresses of her Fates, ancient silks were utilized for a background. Some of the pieces had moth holes, which necessitated the addition of supplementary ornamental motifs, embroidered on cloth to conceal the defects. The discovery of re-embroidery was the result of this enforced expedient. This screen, finished in 1896, was exhibited at the Cercle Artistique, Brussels, where the mayor, M. Balls, saw it. Realizing the possibilities of the method and the skill of the artist, he gave an order to MME, de Rutter, to decorate the marriage hall of the Hôtel de Ville. This order was delivered in 1896. During this period, MME, de Rutter worked feverishly. About the same time that the order for the Hotel de Ville was given, she received from M. van Ussendyck, architect of the Hotel Provincial in Ghent, a commission to design and embroider 6 large allegorical panels. One of them represented wisdom in the habiliments of Minerva, modernized, holding an olive branch. The 5 others were justice, holding a thistle, symbolizing law; eloquence, crowned with roses and holding a lyre; strength, bending an oak branch; truth, crushing a serpent and bearing a mirror and some lilies; and prudence, with the horn of plenty and some holly. These 6 panels are remarkable for the beautiful decorative feeling that suffuses their composition. The tricks of workmanship are varied and all combine to give a wonderful effect. Contrary to the form of presenting the Fates, all the figures are draped. Her next important commission was for 8 large panels, intended to decorate the Congo Free State Department in the Brussels Exposition. These panels represent the triumph of civilization over barbarism, and are now in the museum at Tervuren. They are curious in their symbols of fetichism, and have an attraction that one can scarcely explain. The above are but a part of her important works, and naturally, when not absorbed by these, mme. De Ruyter executes some smaller pieces, which are marvels of patience in their exquisite detail. Perhaps her panels of the 4 seasons may be called her chef d'oeuvre. The writer quoted above also says, "To mme. De Ruyter must be given the credit for the interpretation of work demanding large and varied decorative effect, while in the creation of true artistic composition, she easily stands at the head of the limited coterie of men and women who have mastered this delicate and difficult art. She is a leader in her peculiar craft." B. Rude, mme. Sophie Framiet, /B 1797-1867, medal at Paris Salon, 1833, born in Dijon. This artist painted historical and genre subjects as well as portraits. Her picture of the Sleeping Virgin, 1831, and that of the arrest of the Duchess of Burgundy in Bruges, 1841, are in the Dijon Museum. B. Reich, Rachel, /B. The perfection of flower painting is seen in the works of Rachel Reich. The daughter of a distinguished professor of anatomy, she was born at Amsterdam in 1664. She was for a time a pupil of William van Aelst, but soon studied from nature alone. Some art critics esteem her works superior to those of de Heem and Van Huysum. Let that be as it may. The pictures with which she was no doubt dissatisfied when they passed from her hand more than 2 centuries ago are greatly valued today, and her genius is undisputed. When 30 years old, Rachel Reich married the portrait painter Julian van Poel. She bore him 10 children, but in the midst of all her cares, she never laid her brush aside. Her reputation extended to every court of Europe. She received many honors and was elected to the Academical Society at The Hague. She was received with distinguished courtesies on the 2 occasions when she visited Dusseldorf. B. Stokes Mariana, /B. Honorable Mention at Paris Salon, 1884, gold medal in Munich, 1890, medal at Chicago in 1893. Member of the Society of Painters in Tempera. Born in Graz, Styria. Pupil of Professor W. von Lindenschmidt in Munich, of M. Dagnan Bouveret and M. Courtois in Paris. Her picture, A Parting, is in the Liverpool Gallery, Childhood's Wonder in the Nottingham Gallery, Aucassin and Nicolette in the Pittsburgh Gallery, etc. Mrs. Stokes writes me that she has taken great interest in the revival of tempera painting in recent years. In reviewing the exhibition in the New Gallery, London, The Spectator of May 2, 1903, speaks of the portraits by Mrs. Stokes as charming and adds, "They are influenced by the primitive painters, but in the right way. That is, the painter has used a formal and unrealistic style, but without any sacrifice of artistic freedom." Of a portrait of a child, the same writer says, "It would be difficult to imagine a happier portrait of a little child, and in it may be seen how the artist has used her freedom, for although she has preserved a primitive simplicity, the sky, sea, and windmill have modern qualities of atmosphere. The picture is very subtle in drawing and color, and the sympathy for child life is perfect, seen as it is both in the hands and in the eyes." Another portrait by the same artist is hung on a marble pillar at the top of the stairs leading up to the balcony. The admirable qualities of decoration are well shown by the way it is hung, is a fine piece of strong and satisfactory color, but the decorative aspect in no way takes precedence of the portraiture. We think of the man first and the picture afterward. At the Academy in 1903, Mrs. Stokes exhibited a portrait of J. Westlake, Esquire, K.C. B. Storer, Mrs. Maria Longworth, /B Gold Medal at Paris Exposition, 1900, born in Cincinnati, Ohio. Pupil of the Cincinnati Art School, which her father, Joseph Longworth, endowed with $300,000. After working 4 years, making experiments in clay decoration at the Dallas White, where pottery, Mrs. Storer, who had the enthusiasm of the artistic temperament coupled with fixity of purpose and financial resources, had the courage to open a pottery which she called Rookwood, the name of her father's place on the hills beyond. This was in 1880. 9 years later, this pottery had become self-supporting, and Mrs. Storer then dissolved her personal association with it, leaving it in charge of Mr. William Watts Taylor, who had collaborated with her during 6 years. At the Paris Exposition, Mrs. Storer exhibited about 20 pieces of pottery mounted in bronzal, her own work. It was an exquisite exhibition, and I was proud that it was the work of one of my countrywomen. In 1897, Mr. Storer was appointed United States Minister to Belgium, and Mrs. Storer took a Japanese artist, Asano, to Brussels to instruct her in bronze work. 2 years later, Mr. Storer's mission was changed to Spain, and there Mrs. Storer continued, under Asano's guidance, her work in bronze, some of the results being seen in the mounting of her pottery. At present, Mr. Storer is our ambassador to Austria, and Mrs. Storer writes me that she hopes to continue her work in bronze in Vienna. In the summer of 1903, Mrs. Storer was in Colorado Springs, where she was much interested in the pottery made by Mr. Van Briggle. She became one of the directors of the Van Briggle Pottery Company and encouraged the undertaking most heartily. B. Stum, Maud, /B born in Cleveland, Ohio, pupil of Art Students' League under Kenyon Cox and Siddons Mowbray, and of Oliver Merson in Paris, where her painting was also criticized and approved by Whistler. Her earliest work was flower painting, in which she gained an enviable reputation. In Paris, she began the study of figure painting, and her exhibition at the Salon was favorably received, the purity and brilliancy of her coloring being especially commended. Several of Miss Stum's pictures are well known by reproductions. Among these is The Mother and Child, the original of which is owned by Mr. Patterson of the Chicago Tribune. Her calendars, too, are artistic and popular. Some of these have reached a sale of nearly 500,000. A series of studies of Sarah Bernhardt, in pastel, and a portrait of Julia Marlowe are among her works in this medium. Many of her figure subjects, such as a Venetian matron and a violinist, are portraits, not studies from professional models. This artist has painted an unusual variety of subjects, but is ambitious in still another department of painting decorative art in which she believes she could succeed. Her works are seen in the exhibitions of the Society of American Artists and of the American Watercolor Society. B. Swoboda, Josephine, /B born in Vienna, 1861, pupil of Lofberger and I. V. Berger. This portrait artist has been successful and numbers among her subjects the Princess Henry of Prussia, the late Queen of England, whose portrait she painted at Balmoral in 1893, the Minister Bauhaus, and several members of the Royal House of Austria. The portrait of Queen Victoria was exhibited at the Watercolor Club, Vienna. She also paints charming miniatures. Her pictures are in both oil and watercolors and are praised by the critics of the exhibitions in which they are seen. B. Swope, Mrs. Kate, /B honorable mention at National Academy of Design, 1888, honorable mention and gold medal, Southern Art League, 1895, highest award, Louisville Art League, 1897. Member of Louisville Art League. Born in Louisville, Kentucky. Pupil of Edgar Ward and M. Flagg in New York, and later of B. R. Fitz. Mrs. Swope devotes herself almost entirely to sacred subjects. The pictures that have been awarded medals are Madonnas. She prefers to paint her pictures out of doors and in the sunlight, which results in her working in a high key and, as she writes, in tender, opalescent color. One of her medal pictures is the head of a Madonna, out of doors, in a hazy blue shadow against a background of grapevine foliage. The head is draped in white, the eyes are cast down upon the beholder. A sunspot kisses the white draperies on the shoulder, It is a young, girlish face, but the head is suggestive of great exaltation. A second picture which received an award was a Madonna and Child, out of doors. The figure is half life-size. Dressed in white, the Madonna is stretched at full length upon the grass. Raised on one arm, she gazes into the face of the infant Christ child. Mrs. Swope has had success in pastel, in which not long since she exhibited a mother and child, which was much admired. The motherin and arbor held the child up and reverently kissed the cheek. It was called Love and was exhibited in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Mrs. Swope's most ambitious work, 5 by 3 feet, in size, represents an allegorical subject and is called Revelation. Bissou's Emile Lee/B 3 silver medals from the School of Arts, Geneva, Diploma of Honor at the National Swiss Exposition, 1896. Member of l'Athénée, Geneva. Born at Genoa and studied there under Professors Gillet, Poggi, and Caston. This artist paints landscapes, Swiss subjects principally. Her pictures of Mont Blanc and Chamonix are popular and have been readily sold. They are in private collections in several countries, and when exhibited have been praised in German and French as well as in Swiss publications. BCMer MME, Marguerite/B honorable mention, 1887, bronze medal at Exposition at Lyon. Born at Brary, 1861. Pupil of Mercier. Her principal works are a plaster statue, New France, 1886, in the Museum of Issoudun, a statue of Voltaire, a plaster statue, Life, a plaster group, The Last Farewells, a statue of Diana in the Museum of Amiens, a great number of portrait busts, among them those of Jules Grévy, Flammarion, J. Clarity, etc. At the Salon Artistes Francais, 1902, this artist exhibited a portrait of MGL, and in 1904, a Vision and La Dame aux Camellias. B. Taylor, Elizabeth V/B Sears Prize, Boston Art Museum, bronze medal, Nashville Exposition, 1897. Member of the Copley Society, Boston. Pupil of E.C. Tarbell and Joseph de Camp in the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. This artist paints portraits in miniature and in life size. Her works are numerous and have been seen in many exhibitions. Bethalo MME. Alexandra/B wife of the great Scandinavian painter. This lady is an artist in bookbinding, and her work is much admired. A writer, H.F., says in the studio, December 1903, when the exhibition of bookbinding was held some time ago at the Musée Galliera, Madame Thallo's showcase attracted attention by its variety and its grace. The charm of these bindings lies in the fact that they have none of the massive heaviness of so many productions of this kind. One should be able to handle a book with ease, and not be forced to wrest content with beholding it displaying its beauties behind glass or on the library shelf. And Madame Thallo understood this perfectly when she executed the bindings now reproduced here. But these bindings are interesting not only from the standpoint of their utility and intelligent application. Their ornamentation delights one by its graceful interpretation of nature, rendered with a very special sense of decoration. Moreover, the coloring of these mosaics of leather is restrained and fresh, and the hollyhocks and the hortensias, the bunches of mistletoe and the poppies, which form some of her favorite motifs, go to make up a delicious symphony. B. The Venin Marie Anne Rosalie/B medals at the Salons of 1849, 1859, 1861. Born at Lyon, pupil of Leon Cogniet, portrait and figure painter. Among her pictures the following are noticeable: Flora McIver and Rose Bradwardine, 1848, Portrait of Abbé Jacquet, 1859, Portrait of a Lady, 1861. B. Thomas Sawyer MME, Mathilda, B. Honorable Mention, 1880, Third Class Medal, 1881, Bronze Medal, Exposition, 1889. Born at Troyes, 1859. Pupil of Chapu and Cain. The principal works of this sculptor are A Russian Horse, Lost Dogs, Russian Greyhounds, Huntsman and a Poacher in the Museum of Seymour, Combat of Dogs, purchased by the government, Cow and Calf in the Museum of Nevers, Stag and Bloodhound in the Museum of Troyes, etc. At the Salon Artistes Francais, 1902, MME, Thomas Sawyer exhibited an Irish setter and a laverock, and in 1903, Under the White Squall. B. Thornycroft Mary, B. Born 1814, died 1895, daughter of John Francis, the sculptor whose pupil she was. This artist exhibited at the Royal Academy when very young. Her first important work was a life-size figure called the Flower Girl. In 1840, she married Thomas Thornycroft and went to Rome 2 years later, spending a year in study there. Queen Victoria, after her return, commissioned her to execute statues of the royal children as the Four Seasons. These were much admired when exhibited at the Academy. Later, she made portrait statues and busts of many members of the royal family, which were also seen at the Academy exhibition. In his Essays on Art, Palgrave wrote, "Sculpture has at no time numbered many successful followers among women. We have, however, in Mrs. Thornycroft, one such artist who, by some recent advance and by the degrees of success which she has already reached, promises fairly for the art. Some of this lady's busts have refinement and feeling." B. Thurber, Caroline Nettleton, / B. Born in Oberlin, Ohio. Pupil of Howard Helmick in Washington and of Benjamin Constant and Jean Paul Laurens in Paris. In 1898, Mrs. Thurber took a studio in Paris, where her first work was the portrait of a young violinist, which was exhibited in the Salon of the following spring. This picture met with immediate favor with the public, the art critics, and the press. The Duchess of Sutherland, upon seeing it, sent for the artist and arranged for a portrait of her daughter, which was painted the following autumn while Mrs. Thurber was a guest at Dunribin Castle. This portrait was subsequently exhibited in London and Liverpool. Mrs. Thurber has painted portraits of many persons of distinction in Paris, among them one of Emile Olivier, only daughter of Émile Olivier, president of the Académie Française. Monsieur Olivier, in a personal note to the artist, made the following comment upon the portrait of his daughter. "How much I thank you for the portrait of my daughter. It lives, so powerfully is it colored, and one is tempted to speak to it." Mrs. Thurber is an exhibitor in the Salon, Royal Academy, and New Gallery, London, and other foreign exhibitions, as well as in those of this country. She now has a studio in the family home at Bristol, Rhode Island, on Narragansett Bay, where she works during half the year. In winter, she divides her time among the larger cities as her orders demand. While Mrs. Thurber's name is well known through her special success in the portraiture of children, she has painted many prominent men and women in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, and New England. Among her later portraits are those of Mrs. James Sullivan, one of the lady commissioners of the St. Louis Exposition, Lutjen, Nelson A. Miles, Albert, son of Dr. Shaw, editor of the Review of Reviews, Mrs. A. F. Johnston, former dean of Oberlin College, Augustus S. Miller, mayor of Providence, Hun. L. F. C. Garvin, governor of Rhode Island, and Judge Austin Adams, late of the Supreme Court of Iowa. B. Tharwanger, Félicité Chastanier, / B. This remarkable artist, not long since, when 84 years old, sent to the exhibition at Knightswich, is, in a sense, a branch of the Paris Salon 3 portraits which she had just finished. They were hung in the place of honor and unanimously voted to belong to the first class. MME, Tharwanger was the pupil of Delacroix during 5 years. The master unconsciously did his pupil an injury by saying to her father, "That daughter of yours is wonderfully gifted, and if she were a man, I would make a great artist of her." Hearing this, the young artist burst into tears, and her whole career was clouded by the thought that her sex prevented her being a really great artist and induced in her an abnormal modesty. This occurred about 45 years ago. Since then, we have signally changed all that. Delacroix, who was an enthusiast in color, was the leader of one school of his time, and was opposed by Ingres, who was so wanting in this regard that he was accused of being colorblind. MME, Tharwanger had a curious experience with these artists. When but 17, she was commissioned by the government to copy a picture in the Louvre. One morning, when she was working in the gallery, Ingres passed by and stopped to look at her picture. He examined it carefully and with an expression of satisfaction said, "I am so very glad to see that you have the true idea of art. Remember always that there is no color in nature. The outline is all. If the outline is good, no matter about the coloring, the picture will be good." This story would favor the colorblind theory, as Ingres apparently saw color neither in the original nor the copy. An hour later, Delacroix came to watch the work of his pupil, and after a few minutes exclaimed, I am so happy, my dear girl, to see that you have the true and only spirit of art. Never forget that in nature there is no line, no outline, everything is color. In 1852, MME. Tharwinger was in Philadelphia and remained more than 2 years. She exhibited her pictures, which were favorably noticed by the Philadelphia Inquirer. In July of the above year, her portraits were enthusiastically praised. Not a lineament, not a feature, however trivial, escapes the all-searching eye of the artist, who has the happy faculty of causing the expression of the mind and soul to beam forth in the lifelike and speaking face. In October 1854, her picture of a Madonna and Child was thus noticed by the same paper. For brilliancy, animation, maternal solicitude, form, grace, and feature, it would be difficult to imagine anything more impressive. It is in every sense a gem of the pictorial art, while the execution and finish are such as genius alone could inspire. B. Terlinck's Lewina, / born in Bruges, a daughter of Master Simon. This lady was not only esteemed as an artist in London, but she won the heart of an English nobleman, to whom she was given in marriage by Henry Roman VIII. Her miniatures were much admired and greatly in fashion at the court. Some critics have thought the Terlincks to be the same person with Lewina Bennings or Benick, whose story, as we know it, is much the same as the above. B. Tormaxi, Bertha von, / B. Diploma of Honor, Budapest and Agram. Born at Innsbruck, 1846, pupil of Hausch, Herr and Skindler. Among her pictures are Girl in the Garden, blossoming meadows, autumn morning, and a variety of landscapes. B. Toro, Petronella, / B. a painter of miniatures on ivory which have attained distinction. Among those best known are the portraits of the Prince of Carignano, Duke Amadeo, and the Duchess d'Aosta, with the sons of the Prince of Carignano. She has painted a young woman in an antique dress and another in a modern costume. Her works are distinguished by firmness of touch and great intelligence. She has executed some most attractive landscapes. Be True or Trey, Katharina, / be born at Bamberg. 1740–1811. A successful painter of flowers and still life. Her talent was remarkable when but a child, and her father, who was her only master, began her lessons when she was 10 years old. When still young, she was appointed court painter at Mannheim, and in 1776 was made a professor in the academy at Dusseldorf. Her pictures are in the galleries of Bamberg and Karlsruhe, and in the Darmstadt and Stuttgart museums. B. Arusha de Erminetta, Anna Gertrudis de / B. member of the Academy of Fine Arts, Cadiz, 1846. Born in Cadiz, 1812–1850. She began the study of drawing with Javier, and after her marriage to Juan José de Erminetta, professor of painting and sculpture and director of the Cadiz Academy, continued her work under his direction. A Saint Philomena and Resurrection of the Body, exhibited in 1846, are among her best pictures. Her Saint Geronimo is in the new cathedral at Cadiz, and the Academy has shown respect to her memory by placing her portrait in the room in which its sessions are held. B. Vianney Maria, / be born at Bologna. 1670–1711. I find no reliable biographical account of this artist, whose name appears in the catalogue of the Dresden Gallery as the painter of the reclining Venus, lying on a blue cushion with a cupid at her side. B. Verelst Marion, / be born in 1680. This artist belonged in Antwerp and was of the celebrated artistic family of her name. She was a pupil of her father, Herman, and her uncle, Simon Verelst. She became famous for the excellent likenesses she made and for the artistic qualities of her small portraits. Like so many other artists, she was distinguished for accomplishments outside her art. She was a fine musician and a marvel in her aptitude in acquiring both ancient and modern languages. A very interesting anecdote is related of her, as follows. When in London, one evening at the theater, she sat near 6 German gentlemen, who expressed their admiration of her in the most flattering terms of their language, and at the same time observed her so closely as to be extremely rude. The artist, in their own tongue, remarked that such extravagant praise was the opposite of a compliment. One of them repeated his words in Latin, when she again replied in the same language. The strangers then asked her if she would give them her name. This she did, and further told them that she lived with her uncle, Simon Verelst. In the end, she painted the portrait of each of these men, and the story of their experience proved the reason for the acquaintance of the artist being sought by people of culture and position. Walpole speaks in praise of her portraits and also mentions her unusual attainments in languages. B. Viguier Marie-Louise Elizabeth / B. member of the French Academy. Born in Paris in 1755, that happy writer and learned critic, M. Charles Blanc, begins his account of her thus. All the fairies gathered about the cradle of Elizabeth Viguier, as for the birth of a little princess in the kingdom of art. One gave her beauty, another genius. The fairy gracious offered her a pencil and a palette. The fairy of marriage, who had not been summoned, told her, it is true, that she should wed M. Lebrun. The expert in pictures, but for her consolation, the fairy of travelers promised her that she should bear from court to court, from academy to academy, from Paris to Petersburg, and from Rome to London, her gaiety, her talent, and her easel before which all the sovereigns of Europe and all those whom genius had crowned should place themselves as subjects for her brush. Illustration, a French prince. Marie Viguier Lebrun. It is difficult to write of Madame Lebrun in outline because her life was so interesting in detail. Though she had many sorrows, there is a halo of romance and a brilliancy of atmosphere about her which marks her as a prominent woman of her day, and her autobiography is charming. It is so alive that one forgets that she is not present, telling her story. The father of this gifted daughter was an artist of moderate ability and made portraits in pastel, which Elizabeth, in her Souvenirs, speaks of as good and thinks some of them worthy of comparison with those of the famous Latour. M. Viguier was an agreeable man with much vivacity of manner. His friends were numerous, and he was able to present his daughter to people whose acquaintance was of value to her. She was but 12 years old at the time of his death, and he had already so encouraged her talents as to make her future comparatively easy for her. Elizabeth passed 5 years of her childhood in a convent, where she constantly busied herself in sketching everything that she saw. She tells of her intense pleasure in the use of her pencil, and says that her passion for painting was innate and never grew less, but increased in charm as she grew older. She claimed that it was a source of perpetual youth, and that she owed to it her acquaintance and friendship with the most delightful men and women of Europe. While still a young girl, Emile Viguier studied under Briard, Delaine, and Greuze, but Joseph Vernet advised her to study the works of Italian and Flemish masters, and above all, to study nature for herself, to follow no school or system. To this advice, Mme. Lebrun attributed her success. When 16 years old, she presented 2 portraits to the French Academy, and was thus early brought to public notice. When 21, she married M. Lebrun, of whom she speaks discreetly in her story of her life, but it was well known that he was of dissipated habits and did not hesitate to spend all that his wife could earn. When she left France, 13 years after her marriage, she had not so much as 20 francs, although she had earned 1 million. She painted portraits of many eminent people, and was esteemed as a friend by men and women of culture and high position. The friendship between the artist and Marie Antoinette was a sincere and deep affection between 2 women, neither of whom remembered that one of them was a queen. It was a great advantage to the artist to be thus intimately associated with her sovereign lady. Even in the great state picture of the queen surrounded by her children, at Versailles, one realizes the tenderness of the painter as she lovingly reproduced her friend. Marie Antoinette desired that Mme. Lebrun should be elected to the Academy. Vernet approved it, and an unusual honor was shown her in being made an academician before the completion of her reception picture. At that time, it was a great advantage to be a member of the Academy, as no other artists were permitted to exhibit their works in the Salon of the Beaux-Arts. Mme. Lebrun had one habit with which she allowed nothing to interfere, which was taking a rest after her work for the day was done. She called it her calm, and to it she attributed a large share of her power of endurance, although it lost her many pleasures. She could not go out to dinner or entertain at that hour. The evening was her only time for social pleasures. But when one reads her Souvenirs, and realizes how many notable people she met in her studio and in evening society, it scarcely seems necessary to regret that she could not dine out. Mme. Lebrun was at one period thought to be very extravagant, and one of her entertainments caused endless comments. Her own account of it shows how greatly the cost was exaggerated. She writes that on one occasion she invited 12 or 15 friends to listen to her brother's reading during her calm. The poem read was The Voyage du Jeune Anacharsis en Greece, in which a dinner was described, and even the receipts for making various sauces were given. The artist was seized with the idea of improvising a Greek supper. She summoned her cook and instructed her in what had been read. Among her guests were several unusually pretty ladies who attired themselves in Greek costumes as nearly as the time permitted. Mme. Lebrun retained the white blouse she wore at her work, adding a veil and a crown of flowers. Her studio was rich in antique objects, and a dealer whom she knew loaned her cups, vases, and lamps. All was arranged with the effect an artist knows how to produce. As the guests arrived, Mme. Lebrun added here and there an element of Grecian costume until their number was sufficient for an effective tableau vivant. Her daughter and a little friend were dressed as pages and bore antique vases. A canopy hung over the table, the guests were posed in picturesque attitudes, and those who arrived later were arrested at the door of the supper room with surprise and delight. It was as if they had been transported to another clime. A Greek song was chanted to the accompaniment of a lyre, and when the honey, grapes, and other dishes were served à la grecque, the enchantment was complete. The poet recited odes from Anacreon, and all passed off delightfully. The fame of this novel supper was spread over Paris, and marvelous tales were told of its magnificence and its cost. Mme. Lebrun writes, "Some ladies asked me to repeat this pleasantry. I refused for various reasons, and several of them were disturbed by my refusal. Soon a report that the supper had cost me 20,000 francs was spread abroad." The king spoke of it as a joke to the Marquis of Cubières, who fortunately had been one of the guests, and was able to convince His Majesty of the folly of such a story. Nevertheless, the modest sum of 20,000 at Versailles became 40,000 at Rome. At Vienna, the Baroness de Stroganoff told me that I had spent 60,000 francs for my Greek supper. You know that at Petersburg the price at length was fixed at 80,000 francs, and the truth is that it cost me about 15 francs. Early in 1789, when the warnings of the horrors about to take place began to be heard, Mme. Lebrun went to Italy. In each city that she visited, she was received with great kindness, and many honors were shown her. In Florence, she was invited to paint her own portrait, to be hung in that part of the Uffizi set apart for the portraits of famous painters. Later, she sent the well-known portrait, near that of Angelica Kauffmann. It is interesting to read Goethe's comparison of the two portraits. Speaking of Angelica's first, he writes, "It has a truer tone in the coloring, the position is more pleasing, and the whole exhibits more correct taste and a higher spirit in art. But the work of Lebrun shows more careful execution, has more vigor in the drawing, and more delicate touches. It has, moreover, a clear though somewhat exaggerated coloring." The Frenchwoman understands the art of adornment. The headdress, the hair, the folds of lace on the bosom, all are arranged with care and, as one might say, con amore. The piquant, handsome face, with its lively expression, its parted lips disclosing a row of pearly teeth, presents itself to the beholder's gaze as if coquettishly challenging his admiration, while the hand holds the pencil as in the act of drawing. The picture of Angelica, with head gently inclined and a soft, intellectual melancholy pervading the countenance, evinces higher genius, even if, in point of artistic skill, the preference should be given to the other. Mme. Lebrun found Rome delightful and declared that if she could forget France, she should be the happiest of women. She writes of her fellow artist, "I have been to see Angelica Kauffmann, whom I greatly desired to know. I found her very interesting, apart from her fine talent, on account of her mind and her general culture. She has talked much with me during the 2 evenings I have passed at her house. Her manner is gentle, she is prodigiously learned, but has no enthusiasm, which, considering my ignorance, has not electrified me. I have seen several of her works. Her sketches please me more than her pictures, because they are of a Titianesque color." Mme. Lebrun received more commissions for portraits than she could find time to paint in the 3 years she lived in Italy. She tells us, "Not only did I find great pleasure in painting surrounded by so many masterpieces, but it was also necessary for me to make another fortune. Had not 100 francs of income. Happily, I had only to choose among the grandest people the portraits which it pleased me to paint." Her account of her experiences in Italy is very entertaining, but at last the restlessness of the exile overcame her and impelled her to seek other scenes. She went to Vienna and there remained 3 other years, making many friends and painting industriously until the spirit of unrest drove her to seek new diversions, and she went to Russia. She was there received with great cordiality and remained 6 years crowded with kindness, labor, honor, attainment, joy, and sorrow. Her daughter was the one all-absorbing passionate once the joy and the grief of her life. She was so charming and so gifted as to satisfy the critical requirements of her mother's desires. In Petersburg, where the daughter was greatly admired and caressed, the artist found herself 1,000 times more happy than she had ever been in her own triumphs. Lebrun was so constantly occupied, and the need of earning was so great with her, that she was forced to confide her daughter to the care of others when she made her debut in society. Thus it happened that the young girl met M. Nigris, whom she afterward married. Personally, he was not agreeable to Mme. Lebrun, and his position was not satisfactory to her. We can imagine her chagrin in accepting a son-in-law who even asked her for money with which to go to church on his wedding day. The whole affair was most distasteful, and the marriage occurred at the time of the death of Mme. Lebrun's mother. She speaks of it as a time devoted to tears. Her health suffered so much from this sadness that she tried the benefit of change of scene and went to Moscow. Returning to Petersburg, she determined, in spite of the remonstrances of her friends and the inducements offered her, to remain to go to France. She several times interrupted her journey in order to paint portraits of persons who had heard of her fame and desired to have her pictures. She reached Paris in 1801 and writes thus of her return: "I shall not attempt to express my emotions when I was again upon the soil of France, from which I had been absent 12 years. Fright, grief, joy possessed me, each in turn, for all these entered into the 1,000 varying sentiments which swept over my soul. I wept for the friends whom I had lost upon the scaffold, but I was about to see again those who remained. This France to which I returned had been the scene of atrocious crimes, but this France was my native land." But the new regime was odious to the artist, and she found herself unable to be at home, even in Paris. After a year, she went to London and remained in England 3 years. She detested the climate and was not in love with the people, but she found a compensation in the society of many French families who had fled from France as she had done. In 1804, Mme. Nigris was in Paris, and her mother returned to see her. The young woman was very beautiful and attractive, very fond of society, entirely indifferent to her husband, and not always wise in the choice of her companions. Mme. Lebrun, always hard at work and always having great anxieties, at length found herself so broken in health and so nervously fatigued that she longed to be alone with nature, and in 1808 she went to Switzerland. Her letters written to the Countess Potocka at this time are added to her souvenirs and reveal the very best of her nature. Feeling the need of continued repose, she bought a house at Louveciennes, where she spent much time. In 1818 M. Lebrun died, and 6 years later the deaths of her daughter and her brother left her with no near relative in the world. For a time she sought distractions in new scenes and visited the Touraine and other parts of France, but though she still lived a score of years, she spent them in Paris and Louveciennes. She had with her 2 nieces, who cared for her more tenderly than anyone had done before. One of these ladies was a portrait painter and profited much by the advice of Mme. Lebrun, who wrote of this period and these friends, "They made me feel again the sentiments of a mother, and their tender devotion diffused a great charm over my life. It is near these 2 dear ones and some friends who remain to me that I hope to terminate peacefully a life which has been wandering, but calm, laborious, but honorable." During the last years of her life, the most distinguished society of Paris was wont to assemble about her artists, littérateurs, savants, and men of the fashionable world. Here all essential differences of opinion were laid aside, and all met on common ground. Her calm seemed to have influenced all her life. Only good feeling and equality found a place near her, and few women have the blessed fortune to be so sincerely mourned by a host of friends as was Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun, dying at the age of 87. Mme. Lebrun's works numbered 660 portraits, 15 genre or figure pictures, and about 200 landscapes painted from sketches made on her journeys. Her portraits included those of the sovereigns and royal families of all Europe, as well as the most famous authors, artists, singers, and the learned men in church and state. As an artist, M. Charles Blanc thus esteems her. In short, Mme. Lebrun belonged entirely to the 18th century, I wish to say, to that period of our time which rested itself suddenly at David. While she followed the counsels of Vernet, her pencil had a certain suppleness and her brush a force, but she too often attempted to imitate Greuze in her later works, and she weakened the resemblance to her subjects by abusing the regard noyé, cloudy or indistinct effect. She was too early in vogue to make all the necessary studies, and she too often contented herself with an ingenuity a little too manifest. Without judging her as complacently as the Academy formerly judged her, we owe her an honorable place, because in spite of revolutions and reforms, she continued to her last day the light, spiritual, and French art of Watteau, Nadier, and Fragonard. B. Vigry, Caterina de / B. Lippo Dalmaci was much admired by Malvasia, who not only extols his pictures, but his spirit as well, and represents him as following his art as a religion, beginning and ending his daily work with prayer. Lippo is believed to have been the master of Caterina de Vigry, and the story of her life is in harmony with the influence of such a teacher. She is the only woman artist who has been canonized, and in the convent of the Corpus Domini in Bologna, which she founded, she is known as La Santa, and as a special patron of the fine arts. Caterina was of a noble family of Ferrara, where she was born in 1413. She died when 50 years old, and so great was the reverence for her memory that her remains were preserved, and may still be seen in a chapel of her convent. There are few places in that ever-wonderful Italy of such peculiar interest as this chapel, where sits, clothed in a silken robe, with a crown of gold on the head, the incorrupt body of a woman who died 440 years ago. The body is quite black, while the nails are still pink. She holds a book and a scepter. Around her, in the well-lighted chapel, are several memorials of her life, the viola on which she played, and a manuscript in her exquisite chirography, also a service book illuminated by Caterina, and still more important, one of her pictures, a Madonna and Child, inserted in the wall on the left of the chapel, which is admirable for the beauty of expression in the face of the Holy Mother. We cannot trace Caterina's artist life step by step, but she doubtless worked with the same spirit of consecration and prayer as did that Beato whom we call Angelico, in his Florentine convent, a century earlier. Caterina executed many miniatures, and her easel pictures were not large. These were owned by private families. She is known to us by two pictures of Saint Ursula folding her robe about her companions. One is in the Bologna Gallery, the other in the Academy in Venice. The first is on a wooden panel and was painted when the artist was 39 years old. The saint is represented as unnaturally tall, the figures of her virgins being very small. The mantle and robe of Saint Ursula are of rich brocade ornamented with floral designs, while on each side of her is a white flag, on which is a red cross. The face of the saint is so attractive that one forgets the elongation of her figure. There is a delicacy in the execution, combined with a freedom and firmness of handling fully equal to the standard of her school and time. Many honors were paid to the memory of Caterina de Vigry. She was chosen as the protectress of academies and art institutions, and in the 18th century, a medal was coined, on which she is represented as painting on a panel held by an angel. How few human beings are thus honored 3 centuries after death. B. Vincent MME / B. C. Label. B. Vischer, Anna and Maria / B. These daughters of the celebrated Dutch engraver were known as the Dutch Muses. They made their best reputation by their etchings on glass, but they were also well known for their writing of both poetry and prose. They were associated with the scholars of their time and were much admired. B. Volkmar, Antony Elizabeth Kisilia / B. Born in Berlin, 1827. She studied with Schroeder in her native city, with L. Cogniet in Paris and later in Italy. She returned to Berlin, where she painted portraits and genre subjects. Her picture of the grandmother telling stories is in the Museum of Stettin. Among her works are An Artist's Travels, A German Emigrant, and School Friends. B. Vano, Bessie Potter / B. Bronze Medal, Paris Exposition, 1900, second prize at Tennessee Centennial. Honorable mention at Buffalo Exposition, 1901. Member of the National Sculpture Society and National Arts Club, born in St. Louis, Missouri, 1872. This sculptor is a pupil of the Art Institute, Chicago. Among her best works are A Young Mother, Twin Sisters, His First Journey, girl reading, etc. In the Century magazine, September 1897, Arthur Hober wrote, "There were shown at the Society of American Artists in New York, in the spring of 1896, some statuettes of graceful young womanhood, essentially modern in conception, singularly naive in treatment, refined, and withal intensely personal." While the disclosure is by no means novel, Miss Potter makes us aware that in the daily prosaic life about us, there are possibilities conventional yet attractive, simple, but containing much of suggestion, waiting only the sympathetic touch to be responsive if the proper chord is struck. This author also notices the affiliation of this young woman with the efforts of the Tanagra workers, and says, "But if the inspiration of the young woman is evident, her work can in no way be called imitative." B. Vos Maria / B. born in Amsterdam, 1824, pupil of P. Kiers. Her pictures were principally of still life, 2 of which are seen in the Amsterdam Museum. B. Wagner Maria Dorothea / B., family name Dietrich, 1728–1792. The Gallery of Wiesbaden has 2 of her landscapes, as has also the museum at Gotha. Der Müllengrund, representing a valley with a brook and a mill, is in the Dresden Gallery. B. Ward Miss E. / B. This sculptor has a commission to make a statue of G. R. Clark for the St. Louis Exposition. B. Ward Henrietta Mary Ada / B. Gold and silver medals at the Crystal Palace, bronze medal at the Vienna Exposition, 1873. Born in Newman Street, London, when that street and the neighborhood was the quarter in which the then celebrated artists resided. Mrs. Ward was a pupil of the Bloomsbury Art School and of Sachs Academy. Her grandfather, James Ward, was a Royal Academician and one of the best animal painters of England. While Sir Thomas Lawrence lived, Mrs. Ward's father, who was a miniaturist, was much occupied in copying the works of Sir Thomas on ivory, as the celebrated portrait painter would permit no other artist to repeat them. After the death of Sir Thomas, Mr. Ward became an engraver. Her mother was also a miniature painter. Her great-uncles were William Ward, R.A., and George Morland. John Jackson, R.A., was her uncle, and her husband, Edward M. Ward, to whom she was married at 16, was also a Royal Academician. From 1849, Mrs. Ward exhibited at the Royal Academy during 30 years, without a break, but her husband's death caused her to omit some exhibitions, and since that time, her exhibits have been less regular. For some years, Mrs. Ward has had successful classes for women at Chester Studios, which have somewhat interfered with her painting. Mrs. Ward's subjects have been historical and genre, some of which are extensively known by prints after them. Among these are Joan of Arc, Palissy the Potter, and Mrs. Fry and Mary Saunderson visiting prisoners at Newgate, the last dedicated by permission to Queen Victoria. This picture was purchased by an American. Of her picture of Mary of Scotland, giving her infant to the care of Lord Mar, Palgrave wrote, "This work is finely painted and tells its tale with clearness." Among her numerous works are The Poet Hogg's First Love, Chatterton, the Poet in the Muniment Room, Bristol, Lady Jane Grey Refusing the Crown of England, Antwerp Market, Queen Mary of Scots' Farewell to James I, Washing Day at the Liverpool Docks, The Princes in the Tower, George Roman III, and Mrs. Delaney with his family at Windsor, The Young Pretender, and many others. When 16, Mrs. Ward exhibited 2 heads in crayon. In 1903, at the Academy, she exhibited The Dining Room, Kent House, Knightsbridge. Mrs. Ward painted for Queen Victoria 2 portraits of the Princess Beatrice and a life-size copy of a portrait of the Duke of Albany. She also painted a portrait of Princess Alice of Albany, who is about to marry Prince Alexander of Teck. Edward Roman VII has commissioned this artist to make 2 copies of the state portrait, painted by S. Luke Fildes, R.A. Mrs. Ward had 2 more votes for her admission to the Royal Academy than any other woman of her time has had. B. Wasser Anna / B. born at Zurich, 1676, is notable among the painters of her country. She was the daughter of an artist and early developed a love of drawing and an unusual aptitude in the study of languages. In painting, she was a pupil of Joseph Werner. After a time, she devoted herself to miniature painting. Her reputation extended to all the German courts, as well as to Holland and England, and her commissions were so numerous that her father began to regard her as a mine of riches. He allowed her neither rest nor recreation, and was even unwilling that she should devote sufficient time to her pictures to finish them properly. Under this pressure of haste and constant labor, her health gave way, and she became melancholy. She was separated from her father, and in more agreeable surroundings, her health was restored, and she resumed her painting. Her father then insisted that she should return to him. On her journey home, she had a fall, from the effects of which she died at the age of 34. Fuseli valued a picture by Anna Wasser, which he owned, and praised her correctness of design and her feeling for color. B. Waters, Sadie P. /B 1869-1900. Honorable mention Paris Exposition, 1900. Born in St. Louis, Missouri. This unusually gifted artist made her studies entirely in Paris, under the direction of M. Lou Collivier Merson. Her earlier works were portraits in miniature, in which she was very successful. That of Jane Hayding was much admired. She also excelled in illustrations, but in her later work she found her true province, that of religious subjects. A large picture on ivory, called La Vierge aux Lies, was exhibited in Paris, London, Brussels, and Ghent, and attracted much attention. Illustration, La Vierge aux Rosiers. Sadie Waters. Her picture of the Vierge aux Rosiers, reproduced here, was in the Salon, 1899, and in the Exhibition of Religious Art in Brussels in 1900, after which it was exhibited in New York, and wherever seen it was especially admired. Miss Waters' pictures were exhibited in the Salon Francaise, Champs-Élysées, from 1891 until her death. From the earliest days of childhood, she was remarkable for her skill in drawing and in working out, from her own impressions, pictures of events passing about her. If at the theater she saw a play that appealed to her, she made a picture symbolic of the play, and constantly startled her friends by her original ideas and the pronounced artistic temperament, which was very early the one controlling power in her life. Mr. Carl Guthers thus speaks of her good fortune in studying with M. Merson. As the master and student became more and more acquainted, and the great artist found in the student those kindred qualities, which subsequently made her work so refined and beautiful, he took the utmost care in developing her, drawing the fidelity of line and of expression, and the ever-pervading purity in her work. The sympathy with all good was reflected in the student, as it was ever present with the master, and only those who are acquainted with M. Merson can appreciate how fortunate it was for art that the young artist was under a master of his character and temperament. One of her pictures, called La Chrysantheme, represents a nude figure of a young girl, seated on the ground, leaning against a large basket of chrysanthemums from which she is plucking blossoms. The figure is beautiful and shows the deep study the artist had made, although still so young. The following estimate of her work is made by one competent to speak of such matters. In this epoch of feverish uncertainty, of heated discussions and rivalries in art matters, the quiet, calm figure of Sadie Waters has a peculiar interest and charm generated by her tranquil and persistent pursuit of an ideal she attained in her later works, an ideal of the highest mental order, mystical and human, and so far removed from the tendencies of our time that one might truthfully say, it stands alone. Her talents were manifold. She was endowed with the best of artistic qualities. She cultivated them diligently and slowly acquired the handicraft and skill which enabled her to express herself without restriction. In her miniatures, she learned to be careful, precise, and delicate. In her work from nature, she was human. And in her studies of illuminating, she gained a perfect understanding of ornamental painting and forms. And the subtle ambience of the beautiful old churches and convents, where she worked and pored over the ancient missals, and softly talked with the princely robed Monsignori, no doubt did much to develop her love for the beautiful story, the delicate myth of Christianity, and all this. All these rare qualities and honest efforts we find in her last picture, the Virgin. The beauty and preciseness of this composition, the divine feeling not without a touch of motherly sentiment, its delicacy so rare and so pure, the distinction of its coloring, are all past expression, and give it a place unique in the 19th century. Paul W. Bartlett, Paris, 1903. B. Wegman, Bertha, /B. Honorable Mention, Paris Salon, 1880, Third Class Medal, 1882, Thorwaldsen Medal at Copenhagen, small gold medal, Berlin 1894. Born at Soglio, Switzerland, 1847. Studied in Copenhagen, Munich, Paris, and Florence. She paints portraits and genre subjects. Her pictures, seen at Berlin in 1893, were much admired. They included portraits, figure studies, and Danish interiors. At Munich in 1894, her portraits attracted attention and were commended by those who wrote of the exhibition. Among her works are many portraits. Mother and Child in the Garden and A Widow and Child are two of her genre subjects. B. Wise, Rosario, /B silver medal from the Academy of San Fernando, 1842, for a picture called Silence. Member of the Academy, pupil of Goya who early recognized her talent. In 1823, when Goya removed to Berlioz, she studied under the architect Tiburcio Perez. After a time, she joined Goya and remained his pupil until his death in 1828. She then entered the studio lacquer, where she did admirable work. In 1833, for the support of her mother and herself, she made copies of pictures in the Prado on private commissions. In 1842, she was appointed teacher of drawing to the royal family, in which position she did not long continue, her death occurring in 1843. Among her pictures are Attention, an allegorical figure, an angel, a Venus, and a Diana. Among her portraits are those of Goya, Velázquez, and Figaro. B. Wiegmann, Marie Elizabeth /B, family name Henk. Small gold medal, Berlin. Born 1826 at Salzburg, Silesia, died 1893 at Dusseldorf. In 1841 she began to study with Stilke in Dusseldorf, later with K. Sohn. She traveled extensively in Germany, England, Holland, and Italy, and settled with her husband, Rudolf Wiegmann, in Dusseldorf. In the museum at Hanover is The Colonists' Children Crowning a Negro Woman, and in the National Gallery at Berlin, a portrait of Schnoss. Some children's portraits, and one of the Countess Hatzfeld, should also be mentioned among her works. In portraiture, her work was distinguished by talent, spirit, and true artistic composition. In genre especially, the so-called ideal genre she produced some exquisite examples. B. Wentworth, Marquise Cecilia de /B Gold Medal, Tour National Exposition, Lyon and Turin, Honorable Mention, Paris Salon, 1891, Bronze Medal, Paris Exposition, 1900, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, 1901, born in New York. Pupil of the Convent of the Sacred Heart and of Cabinal in Paris. This artist has painted portraits of Leo Roman XIII, who presented her with a gold medal, of Cardinal Ferrata, of Chalamel Lacker, President of the Senate at the time when the portrait was made, and of many others. Her picture of Faith is in the Luxembourg Gallery. At the Salon des Artistes Francais, 1903, Madame de Wentworth exhibited the portrait of Emile X and Solitude. B. Wheeler, Janet, /B First Toppen Prize and Mary Smith Prize at Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia, Gold Medal, Philadelphia Art Club. Fellow of Academy of Fine Arts and member of Plastic Club, Philadelphia. Born in Detroit, Michigan. Pupil of Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia, and of the Julian Academy in Paris. This artist paints portraits almost entirely, which are in private hands. I know of but one figure picture by her, which is called Beg for It. She was a miniaturist several years before taking up larger portraits. B. White, Florence, /B Silver Medal at Woman's Exhibition, Earl's Court, Silver Medal for a pastel exhibited in Calcutta. Born at Brighton, England. Pupil of Royal Academy Schools in London and of Bouguereau and Perrier in Paris. In 1899, this artist exhibited a portrait in the New Gallery. In 1901, a portrait of Bertram Blunt, Esquire, at the Royal Academy, and in 1902, a portrait of Peggy, a little girl with a poodle. She has sent miniatures to the Academy exhibitions several years. That of Miss Lyall Wilson was exhibited in 1903. B. Whitman, Sarah de St. Prix, /B Bronze Medal at Columbian Exposition, Chicago, 1893, Gold and Bronze Medals at Atlanta Exposition, Diploma at Pan American, Buffalo, 1901. Member of the Society of American Artists, New York, Copley Society, Boston, Watercolor Club, Boston. Born in Baltimore, Maryland. Pupil of William M. Hunt and Thomas Couture. Mrs. Whitman has painted landscapes and portraits, and of recent years has been much occupied with work in glass. Windows by her are in Memorial Hall, Cambridge, in the Episcopal Church in Andover, Massachusetts, etc. An altarpiece by her is in All Saints Church, Worcester. Her portrait of Senator Bayard is in the State Department, Washington. B. Whitney, Anne, / born in Watertown, Massachusetts, made her studies in Belmont and Boston, and later in Paris and Rome. Miss Whitney's sculptures are in many public places. A heroic-size statue of Samuel Adams is in Boston and Washington, in bronze and marble. Harriet Martineau is at Wellesley College in marble. The Lotos Eaters is in Newton and Cambridge in marble. Lady Godiva, a life-size statue in marble, is in a private collection in Milton. A statue of Leif Erikson in bronze is in Boston and Milwaukee. A bust of Professor Pickering in marble is in the Observatory, Cambridge. A statue, Roma, is in Albany, Wellesley, St. Louis, and Newton in both marble and bronze. Charles Sumner in bronze of heroic size is in Cambridge. A bust of President Walker, bronze, is also in Cambridge. President Stearns, a bust in marble, is in Amherst. A bust of Mrs. Alice Freeman Palmer is in Cambridge. A bust of Professor Palmer is on a bronze medal. The Calla Fountain, in bronze, is in Franklin Park. And many other busts, medals, etc. in marble, bronze, and plaster are in private collections. B. Wilson, Melva Beatrice, /B, prize of $100 a year for 3 successive years at Cincinnati Art Museum. Honorable mention, Paris Salon, 1897. Born in Cincinnati, 1875. Pupil of Cincinnati Art Museum, under Louis T. Robisso and Thomas Noble, in Paris, of Rodin and Vincent Norodny. By special invitation, this sculptor has been an exhibitor at the National Sculpture Society, New York. Her principal works are The Minute Man, in Corcoran Art Gallery, Washington, D.C., The Volunteer, which was given by the state of New York as a military prize to a Vermont regiment, an equestrian statue of John F. Doyle, Jr., Bull and Bear and the Polo Player in bronze, owned by Tiffany & Co., Retribution, in a private collection in New York. Miss Wilson has been accorded the largest commission given any woman sculptor for the decoration of the buildings of the St. Louis Exposition. She is to design 8 spandrels for Machinery Hall, each one being 28 by 15 feet in size, with figures larger than life. The design represents the wheelwright and boiler-making trades. Reclining nude figures, of colossal size, bend toward the keystone of the arch, each holding a tool of a machinist. Interlaced cogwheels form the background. B. Worth, Anna Marie, /B, member of the Munich Art Association. Born in St. Petersburg, 1846. Studied in Vienna under Strasgeripka, commonly known as Johann Cannonend, in Paris, although her year's work in the latter city seems to have left no trace upon her manner of painting. The genre pictures, in which she excels, clearly show the influence of the Old Dutch school. A writer in Modern Kunst says, in general, that she shows us real human beings under the Précieuse's ridicules, the languishing gallants and the pedant, and often succeeds in individualizing all these with the sharpness of a Chodowicki, though at times she is merely good-natured, and therefore weak. Sometimes, like Terborch, by her anecdotal treatment, she can set a whole romantic story before you. Again, in the manner of Gerard Dow, she gives you a penetrating glimpse into old burgher lifework that is quite out of touch with the dilettantism that largely pervades modern art. The admirers of this unusual artist seek out her genre pictures in the exhibitions of today, much as one turns to an idyll of Heinrich Voss after a dose of the storm and stress poets. Most of her works are in private galleries. One of her best pictures will be seen at the St. Louis Exposition. B. Wissinger Florian, Olga, /B Bavarian Ludwig Medal, 1891, Medal at Chicago, 1893. Born in Vienna, 1844. Pupil of Schaffer and Schwindler, she has an excellent reputation as a painter of flowers. In the New Gallery, Munich, is one of her pictures of this sort, and at Munich, 1893, her flower pieces were especially praised in the reports of the exhibition. She also paints landscapes, in which she gains power each year. Her color grows finer and her design or modeling stronger. At Vienna, 1890, it was said that her picture of the Bauernhof was, by its excellent color, a disadvantage to the pictures near it, and the shore motive in Abasia was full of artistic charm. At Vienna, 1893, she exhibited a cycle, The Months, which bore witness to her admirable mastery of her art. Among her works are some excellent Venetian subjects: On the Rialto, Morning on the Shore, and In Venice. B. Wolfe, Betty, /B. Honorable Mention, Berlin, 1890. Member of the Association of Women Artists and Friends of Art, also of the German Art Association. Born in Berlin, where she was a pupil of Karl Stofferbern, she also studied in Munich under Karl Marr. Besides numerous portraits of children in pastel, this artist has painted portraits in oils of many well-known persons, among whom are Prof. H. Steinthal, Prof. Albrecht Weber, and General von Zeklinski. B. Wolters, Henrietta/B, family name Van P. Born in Amsterdam, 1692-1741. Pupil of her father, and later made a special study of miniature under Christoffel Leblond. Her early work consisted largely in copies from Van de Velde and Van Dyck. Her miniatures were so highly esteemed that Peter the Great offered her a salary of 6,000 florins as his court painter, and Frederick William of Prussia invited her to his court, but nothing could tempt her away from her home in Amsterdam. She received 400 florins for a single miniature, a most unusual price in her time. B. Wood, Caroline S/B, daughter of Honorable Horatio D. Wood, of St. Louis. This sculptor has made unusual advances in her art, to which she has seriously devoted herself less than 4 years. She has studied in the Art School of Washington University, the Art Institute, Chicago, and is now a student in the Art League, New York. She has been commissioned by the state of Missouri to make a statue to represent the spirit of the state of Missouri for the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. B. Woodbury, Marcia Oakes, /B Prize at Boston Art Club, Medals at Mechanics Association Exhibition, Atlanta and Nashville Expositions. Member of the New York and Boston Watercolor Clubs. Born at South Berwick, Maine. Pupil of Tommaso Juglaris in Boston and of Lasar in Paris. Mrs. Woodbury paints in oils and watercolors. The latter are genre scenes, and among them are several Dutch subjects. She has painted children's portraits in oils. Her pictures are in private hands in Boston, New York, Chicago, and Cincinnati. The Smoker and Mother and Daughter, a triptych, are two of her principal pictures. B. Woodward, Doing, /B Grand Prize of the Academy Julian, 1894. Member of Watercolor Club, Baltimore, Charcoal Club, Baltimore, L'Union des Femmes Painters et Sculpteurs de France. Born at Williamsport, Pennsylvania, pupil of Pennsylvania Academy a few months, in Paris, of Bouguereau Robert Fleury and Jules Lefebvre. Her Holland family at Prayer, exhibited at the Paris Salon, 1893, and Jessica, belonged to the Public Library in Williamsport. Clamdiggers Coming Home Cape Cod was in the Venice Exhibition, 1903. One of her pictures shows the Julian Academy Criticism Day. She has painted many portraits, and her work has often been thought to be that of a man, which idea is no doubt partly due to her choosing subjects from the lives of working men. She is of the modern school of colorists. B. Wright, Ethel, /B. This artist contributed annually to the exhibitions of the London Academy from 1893 to 1900, as follows. In 1893, she exhibited Millie and Echo. In 1894, The Prodigal. In 1895, a watercolor, Lilies. In 1896, Rejected. In 1897, a portrait of Mrs. Lawrence Phillips. In 1898, The Song of Ages, reproduced in this book. In 1899, a portrait of Mrs. Arthur Strauss, and in 1900, one of Miss Vaughan. B. Wright, Mrs. Patience, /B. Born at Bordentown, New Jersey, 1725, of a Quaker family. When left a widow with 3 children to care for, she went to London, where she found a larger field for her art than she had in the United States, where she had already made a good reputation as a modeler in wax. By reason of this change of residence, she has often been called an English sculptress. Although the imaginative and pictorial is not cultivated or even approved by Quakers, Patience Lovell, while still a child, and before she had seen works of art, was content only when supplied with dough, wax, or clay, from which she made figures of men and women. Very early these figures became portraits of the people she knew best, and in the circle of her family and friends, she was considered a genius. Very soon after Mrs. Wright reached London, she was fully employed. She worked in wax, and her full-length portrait of Lord Chatham was placed in Westminster Abbey, protected by a glass case. This attracted much attention, and the London journals praised the artist. She made portraits of the king and queen, who, attracted by her brilliant conversation, admitted her to an intimacy at Buckingham House, which could not then have been accorded to an untitled English woman. Illustration from a Copley print. The Song of Ages. Ethel Wright. Mrs. Wright made many portraits of distinguished people, but few, if any, of these can now be seen, although it is said that some of them have been carefully preserved by the families who possess them. To Americans, Mrs. Wright is interesting by reason of her patriotism, which amounted to a passion. She is credited with having been an important source of information to the American leaders in the time of the Revolution. In this, she was frank and courageous, making no secret of her views. She even ventured to reprove George Roman III for his attitude toward the colonists, and by this boldness lost the royal favor. She corresponded with Franklin in Paris, and new appointments, or other important movements in the British Army, were speedily known to him. Washington, when he knew that Mrs. Wright wished to make a bust of him, replied in most flattering terms that he should think himself happy to have his portrait made by her. Mrs. Wright very much desired to make likenesses of those who signed the Treaty of Peace, and of those who had taken a prominent part in making it. She wrote, "To shame the English king, I would go to any trouble and expense, and add my mite to the honor due to Adams, Jefferson, and others." Though so essentially American as a woman, the best of her professional life was passed in England, where she was liberally patronized and fully appreciated. Dunlap calls her an extraordinary woman, and several writers have mentioned her power of judging the character of her visitors, in which she rarely made a mistake and chose her friends with unusual intelligence. Her eldest daughter married in America and was well known as a modeler in wax in New York. Her younger daughter married the artist Hopner, a rival in portraiture of Stuart and Lawrence, while her son Joseph was a portrait painter. His likeness of Washington was much admired. B. Wolfrat Margareta / B. born at Arnheim, 1678–1741, was a pupil of Caspar Netscher of Heidelberg, whose little pictures are of fabulous value. Although he was so excellent a painter, he was proud of Margareta, whose pictures were much admired in her day. Her musical conversation is in the Museum of Schwerin. Her Cleopatra and Semiramis are in the gallery at Amsterdam. B. Yandell, Enid / B. Special Designers Medal, Chicago, 1893, Silver Medal, Tennessee Exposition, Honorable Mention, Buffalo, 1901. Member of National Sculpture Society, Municipal Art Society, National Arts Club All of New York. Born in Louisville, Kentucky. Graduate of Cincinnati Art Academy. Pupil of Philip Martini in New York and in Paris of Frederick MacMonnies and Auguste Rodin. The principal works of this artist are the Mayer Lewis Monument at New Haven, Connecticut, the Chancellor Garland Memorial, Vanderbilt University, Nashville, Carrie Brown Memorial Fountain, Providence, Daniel Boone and the Ruff Fountain, Louisville. Richard Laidguest, in January 1902, wrote a sketch of Miss Yandell's life and works for The Outlook, in which he says that Miss Yandell was the first woman to become a member of the National Sculpture Society. I quote from his article as follows. The most imposing product of Miss Yandell's genius was the heroic figure of Athena, 25 feet in height, which stood in front of the reproduction of the Parthenon at the Nashville Exposition. This is the largest figure ever designed by a woman. Illustration, statue of Daniel Boone. Enid Yandell. Made for St. Louis Exposition. The most artistic was probably the little silver tankard which she did for the Tiffany Company, a bit of modeling which involves the figures of a fisher boy and a mermaid. The figure of Athena is large and correct, those of the fisher boy and mermaid poetic and impassioned. The boy kisses the maid when the lid is lifted. He is always looking over the edge, as if yearning for the fate that each new drinker who lifts the lid forces upon him. Of the Carrie Brown Memorial Fountain he says, "The design of the fountain represents the struggle of life symbolized by a group of figures which is intended to portray, according to Miss Yandell, not the struggle for bare existence, but the attempt of the immortal soul within us to free itself from the handicaps and entanglements of its earthly environments. It is the development of character, the triumph of intellectuality and spirituality I have striven to express. Life is symbolized by the figure of a woman, the soul by an angel, and the earthly tendencies duty, passion, and avarice by male figures. Life is represented as struggling to free herself from the gross earthly forms that cling to her. The figure of life shows a calm, placid strength, well calculated to conquer in a struggle, and the modeling of her clinging robes and the active muscle of the male figures is firm and lifelike. The mantle of truth flows from the shoulders of the angel, forming a drapery for the whole group, and serving as a support for the basin, the edges of which are ornamented with dolphins spouting water. The silhouette formed by the mass of the fountain is most interesting and successful from all points of view. The lines of the composition are large and dignified, especially noticeable in the modeling of the individual figures, which is well studied and technically excellent. At Buffalo, where this fountain was exhibited, it received honorable mention. Miss Yandell has been commissioned to execute a symbolical figure of victory and a statue of Daniel Boone for the St. Louis Exposition. B. Ikens, Lawrence Catherine, /B elected to the Guild of Antwerp in 1659, born in Antwerp. Pupil of her father, Jan Ikens. Flowers, fruits, and insects were her favorite subjects and were painted with rare delicacy. Two of these pictures are in the Museo del Prado at Madrid. They are a festoon of flowers and fruits with a medallion in the center, on which is a landscape, and a garland of flowers with a similar medallion. B. Census, Margareta, /B. There were few women artists in the Scandinavian countries in the early years of the 18th century. Among them was Margareta Census, a Danish lady, who painted a large number of portraits and some historical subjects. She was best known, however, for her miniature copies of the works of famous artists. These pictures were much the same in effect as the picture miniatures now in vogue. Her copy of Correggio's Zingarella was much admired and was several times repeated. Supplement containing names previously omitted and additions. The asterisk denotes preceding mention of the artist. B. Builders, Marie van Bos, /B. This celebrated landscape painter became an artist through her determination to be an artist rather than because of any impelling natural force driving her to this career. After patient and continuous toil, she felt that she was developing an artistic impulse. The advice of Van de Sandbachhuizen greatly encouraged her, and the candid and friendly criticism of Bosboom inspired her with the courage to exhibit her work in public. In the summer of 1875, in Vorden, she met Johannes Builders, under whose direction she studied landscape painting. This master took great pains to develop the originality of his pupil rather than to encourage her adapting the manner of other artists. During her stay in Vorden, she made a distinct gain in the attainment of an individual style of painting. After her return to her home at The Hague, Builders established a studio there and showed a still keener interest in his pupil. This artistic friendship resulted in the marriage of the two artists, and in 1880 they established themselves in Oosterbeek. Here began the intimate study of the heath, which so largely influenced the best pictures by Frau Builders. In the garden of the picturesque house in which the two artists lived was an old barn, which became her studio, where, early and late, in all sorts of weather, she devotedly observed the effects later pictured on her canvases. At this time she executed one of her best works, now in the collection of the Prince Regent of Brunswick. It is thus described by a Dutch writer in Rousse's Dutch Painters of the 19th Century. It represents a deep pool, overshadowed by old gnarled willows in their autumnal foliage, their silvery trunks bending over, as if to see themselves in the clear, still water. On the edge of the pool are flowers and variegated grasses, the latter looking as if they wished to crowd out the former as if they were in the right and the flowers in the wrong, as if such bright-hued creatures had no business to eclipse their more somber tones, as if they and they alone were suited to this silent, forsaken spot. Johannes Builders was fully 25 years older than his wife, and the failure of both his physical and mental powers in his last days required her absolute devotion to him. In spite of this, the garden studio was not wholly forsaken, and nearly every day she accomplished something there. After her husband's death, she had a long illness. On her recovery, she returned to The Hague and took the studio which had been that of the artist Mauve. The life of the town was wearisome to her, but she found a compensation in her reunion with her old friends, and with occasional visits to the heath, she passed most of her remaining years in the city. Her favorite subjects were landscapes with birch and beech trees, and the varying phases of the heath and of solitary and unfrequented scenes. Her works are all in private collections. Among them are The Forester's Cottage, Autumn in Dorworth, The Old Birch, and The Old Oaks of Wadden at Sunset. B. Bosnanska, Olga, / born in Krakow, where she was a pupil of Matejko. Later, in Munich, she studied with Kricheldorf and Dürer. Her mother was a French woman, and critics trace both Polish and French characteristics in her work. She paints portraits and genre subjects. She is skillful in seizing salient characteristics, and her chief aim is to preserve the individuality of her sitters and models. She skillfully manages the sidelights, and by this means produces strong effects. After the first exhibition of her pictures in Berlin, her God-given talent was several times mentioned by the art critics. At Munich, she made a good impression by her pictures exhibited in 1893 and 1895. At the exposition in Paris, 1889, her portrait and a study in pastel were much admired and were generously praised in the art journals. B. Cox, Louise, / B. The picture by Mrs. Cox, reproduced in this book, illustrates two lines in a poem by Austin Dobson called A Song of Angiola in Heaven. Then set I lips to hers and felt, ah, God, the hard pain fade and melt. B. De Morgan, Emily, / B. Family name Pickering. When 16 years old, this artist entered the Slade School, and 18 months later received the Slade Scholarship, by which she was entitled to benefit for 3 years. At the end of the first year, however, she resigned this privilege because she did not wish to accept the conditions of the gift. As a child, she had loved the pictures of the precursors of Raphael in the National Gallery, and her first exhibited picture, Ariadne in Naxos, hung in the Grosvenor Gallery in 1877, proved how closely she had studied these old masters. At this time, she knew nothing of the English pre-Raphaelites. Later, however, she became one of the most worthy followers of Burne-Jones. About the time that she left the Slade School, one of her uncles took up his residence in Florence, where she has spent several winters in work and study. One of her most important pictures is inscribed with these lines: "Dark is the valley of shadows, empty the power of kings, blind is the favor of fortune, hungry the caverns of death, dim is the light from beyond, unanswered the riddle of life." This pessimistic view of the world is illustrated by the figure of a king, who, in the midst of ruins, places his foot upon the prostrate form of a chained victim. Happiness, with bandaged eyes, scatters treasures into the bottomless pit, a desperate youth being about to plunge into its depths. A kneeling woman, praying for light, sees brilliant figures soaring upward, their beauty charming roses from the thorn bushes. Other pictures by this artist remind one of the works of Botticelli. Of her Ithuriel, W. S. Sparrow wrote, "It may be thought that this Ithuriel is too mild, too much like Shakespeare's Oberonta, be in keeping with the terrific tragedy depicted in the first 4 books of the Paradise Lost. Eve, too, lovely as she is, seems to bear no likelihood of resemblance to Milton's superb Mother of Mankind. But the picture has a sweet, serene grace, which should make us glad to accept from Mrs. De Morgan another Eve and another Ithuriel, true children of her own fancy. The myth of Boreas and Orithyia, though faulty perhaps in technique, is good in conception and arrangement. Mrs. De Morgan has produced some impressive works in sculpture. Among these are Medusa, a bronze bust, and a Mater Dolorosa in terracotta. B. Disclai, Irene, / B. born in Bucharest, the daughter of a Romanian advocate. She gave such promise as an artist that a government stipend was bestowed on her, which enabled her to study in Paris, where she was a pupil of Laurens and E. Carrière. Her work is tinged with the melancholy and intensity of her nature, perhaps of her race. Yet there is something in her grim conceptions, or rather in her treatment of them, that demands attention and compels admiration. Even in her Sweet Dream, which represents the half-nude figure of a young girl holding a rose in her hand, there is more sadness than joy, as though she said, "It is only a dream, after all." Chanson, exhibited at the Paris Exposition, 1900, displays something of the same quality. B. Aristo Cossack, Princess Marie, / B. among the many Russian portraits in the Paris Exposition, 1900, too, the work of this pupil of Mitchell de Zichy's stood out in splendid contrast with the crass realism or the weak idealism of the greater number. One was a half-length portrait of the laughing Mme. Paquin. Full of life and movement were the pose of the figure, the fall of the draperies, and the tilt of the expressive fan. The other was the spirited portrait of Baron von Friedrichs, a happy combination of cavalier and soldier in its manly strength. When but 16 years old, the Princess Marie roused the admiration of the Russian court by her portrait of the Grand Duke Sergius. This led to her painting portraits of various members of the royal family while she was still a pupil of de Zichy's. After her marriage, she established herself in Paris, where she endeavors to preserve an incognito as an artist in order to work in the most quiet and devoted manner. B. Gobler, Elise, /B. This artist studied drawing under Steffek and color under Dürer, in Munich. Connoisseurs in art welcome the name of Elise Gobler in exhibitions and recall the remarkable violet blue lights and the hazy atmosphere in her works, out of which emerges some charming, graceful figure. Perhaps a young girl on whose white shoulders the light falls, while a shadow half conceals the rest of the form. These dreamy, Madonna-like beauties are the result of the most severe and protracted study. Without the remarkable excellence of their technique and the unusual quality of their color, they would be the veriest sentimentalities. But wherever they are seen, they command admiration. Her Cinderella, exhibited in Berlin in 1880, was bought by the emperor. Another picture of the same subject, but quite different in effect, was exhibited in Munich in 1883. In the same year, in Berlin, a young girl with pussy willows and a Neapolitan water carrier were seen. In 1887, in Berlin, her Vanitas, Vanitatum Vanitas, and the Net Mender were exhibited, and 10 years later, Cheerfulness was highly commended. At Munich in 1899, her picture, called Elegy, attracted much attention and received unusual praise. B. Herbelin, Jean Mathilde, /B. This miniaturist has recently died at the age of 84. In addition to the medals and honors she had received previous to 1855, it was that year decided that her works should be admitted to the Salon without examination. She was a daughter of General Habert and a niece of Belloc, under whom she studied her art while still very young. Her early ambition was to paint large pictures, but Delacroix persuaded her to devote herself to miniature painting, in which art she has been called the best in the world. She adopted the full tones and broad style to which she was accustomed in her larger works, and revolutionized the method of miniature painting in which stippling had prevailed. When 18 years old, she went to Italy, where she made copies from the masters and did much original work as well. Among her best portraits are those of the Baroness Habert, Guizot, Rossini, Isaby, Robert Fleury, M. and Mme. de Torigny, Count de Zeppel, and her own portrait. Besides portraits, she painted a picture called A Child Holding a Rose, Souvenir, and A Young Girl Playing with a Fan. B. Johnson, Adelaide, /B. Born at Plymouth, Illinois. This sculptor first studied in the St. Louis School of Design, and in 1877, at the St. Louis Exposition, received 2 prizes for the excellence of her wood carving. During several years, she devoted herself to interior decoration, designing not only the form and color to be used in decorating edifices, but also the furniture and all necessary details to complete them and make them ready for use. Being desirous of becoming a sculptor, Miss Johnson went, in 1883, to England, Germany, and Italy. In Rome, she was a pupil of Monteverde and of Altany, who was then president of the Academy of St. Luke. After 2 years, she returned to America and began her professional career in Chicago, where she remained but a year before establishing herself in Washington. Her best-known works are portrait busts, which are numerous. Many of these have been seen in the Corcoran Art Gallery and in other public exhibitions. Of her bust of Susan B. Anthony, the sculptor, Lorado Taft, said, "Your bust of Miss Anthony is better than mine. I tried to make her real, but you have made her not only real but ideal." Among her portraits are those of General Logan, Dr. H. W. Thomas, Isabella Beecher Hooker, William Tebb, Esquire of London, etc. B. Kogel, Linda, /B. Born at The Hague, a pupil of Stauffer Bern in Berlin and of Herderich in Munich. Her attachment to Impressionism leads this artist to many experiments in color, as one critic wrote, to play with color. She apparently prefers to paint single figures of women and young girls, but her works include a variety of subjects. She also practices etching, pen and ink drawing, as well as crayon and watercolor sketching. The light touch in some of her genre pictures is admirable, and in contrast, the portrait of her father, the court preacher, displays a masculine firmness in its handling and is a very striking picture. In 1895, she exhibited at the Munich Secession the portrait of a woman, delicate but spirited, and a group which was said to set aside every convention in the happiest manner. B. Kroner, Magda, /B. The pictures of flowers which this artist paints prove her to be a devoted lover of nature. She exhibited at Dusseldorf in 1893, a captivating study of red poppies and another of flowering vetch, which were bought by the German emperor. The following year she exhibited 2 landscapes, one of which was so much better than the other that it was suggested that she might have been assisted by her husband, the animal painter, Christian Kroner. One of her most delightful pictures, A Quiet Corner, represents a retired nook in a garden, overgrown with foliage and flowers, so well painted that one feels that they must be fragrant. B. Lepsius, Sabina, /B. daughter of Gustav Graf and wife of the portrait painter, Lepsius. She was a pupil of Gusso, then of the Julian Academy in Paris, and later studied in Rome. Her pictures have an unusual refinement. Like some other German women artists, she aims at giving a subtle impression of character and personality in her treatment of externals, and her work has been said to affect one like music. The portrait of her little daughter, painted in a manner which suggests Van Dyck, is one of the works which entitle her to consideration. B. Leister, Judith, /B. a native of Haarlem on Zandam, the date of her birth being unknown. She died in 1660. In 1636, she married the well-known artist Jan Molmer. She did her work at a most interesting period in Dutch painting. Her earliest picture is dated 1629. She was chosen to the Guild of St. Luke at Haarlem in 1633. Recent investigations make it probable that certain pictures which have for generations been attributed to Frans Hals were the work of Judith Leister. In 1893, a most interesting lawsuit, which occurred in London and was reported in the Times, concerned a picture known as The Fiddlers, which had been sold as a work of Frans Hals for £4,500. The purchasers found that this claim was not well founded and sought to recover their money. A searching investigation traced the ownership of the work back to a connoisseur of the time of William Roman III. In 1678 it was sold for a small sum, and was then called A Dutch Courtesan Drinking with a Young Man. The monogram on the picture was called that of Frans Hals, but is reproduced and explained by C. Hofstede de Groot in the Jaarboek voor Koninklijk Preußische Kunstsamlingen. For 1893, it seems evident that the signature is J.L. and not F.H. Similar initials are on the flute player in the gallery at Stockholm, the seamstress in the Hague Gallery, and on a picture in the Six collection at Amsterdam. It is undeniable that these pictures all show the influence of Hals, whose pupil Judith Leister may have been, and whose manner she caught as Emil. Mayer caught that of Greuze and Prudhan. At all events, the present evidence seems to support the claim that the world is indebted to Judith Leister for these admirable pictures. B. Mock, Hildegard von /B. This painter studied in Dresden and Munich, and under the influence of Anton Pepinos, she developed her best characteristics, her fine sense of form and of color. She admirably illustrates the modern tendency in art toward individual expression, a tendency which permits the following of original methods and affords an outlet for energy and strength of temperament. Fraulein Mock has made a name in both portrait and genre painting. Her Waldesgrauen represents 2 naked children in an attitude of alarm as the forest grows dark around them. It gives a vivid impression of the mysterious charm and the possible dangers which the deep woods present to the childish mind. B. Mayer, Marie-Françoise Constance, /B. As early as 1806, this artist received a gold medal from the Paris Salon, awarded to her picture of Venus and Love Asleep. Born 1775, died 1821. She studied under Sauvé, Greuze, and Prudhan. There are various accounts of the life of Emil Mayer. That of M. Charles Genlet is the authority followed here. It is probable that Emil Mayer came under the influence of Prudhan as early as 1802, possibly before that time. Prudhan, a sensitive man, absorbed in his art, had married at 20 a woman who had no sympathy with his ideals, and when she realized that he had no ambition and was likely to be always poor, her temper got the better of any affection she had ever felt for him. Prudhan, in humiliation and despair, lived in a solitude almost complete. It was with difficulty that Emil Mayer persuaded this master to receive her as a pupil, but this being gained, both these painters had studios in the Sorbonne from 1809 to 1821. At the latter date, all artists were obliged to vacate the Sorbonne ateliers to make room for some new department of instruction. Emil Mayer had been for some time in a depressed condition, and her friends had been anxious about her. Whether leaving the Sorbonne had a tendency to increase her melancholy is not known, but her suicide came as a great surprise and shock to all who knew her, especially to Prudhon, who survived her less than 2 years. Prudhon painted several portraits of Emil Mayer, the best known being now in the Louvre. It represents an engaging personality in which vivacity and sensibility are distinctly indicated. Emil Mayer had made her debut at the Salon of 1896 with a portrait of Sigismund Mayer, painted by herself, and showing a sketch for the portrait of her mother, also a picture of a young scholar with a portfolio under his arm, and a miniature. From this time her work was seen at each year's Salon. Her pictures in 1810 were the Happy Mother and the Unhappy Mother, which are now in the Louvre. The contrast between the joyousness of the mother with her child and the anguish of the mother who has lost her child is portrayed with great tenderness. The Dream of Happiness, also in the Louvre, represents a young couple in a boat with their child. The boat is guided down the stream of life by love and fortune. This is one of her best pictures. It is full of poetic feeling, and the flesh tints are unusually natural. The work of this artist is characterized by delicacy of touch and freshness of color, while pervaded by a peculiar grace and charm. Her drawing is good, but the composition is less satisfactory. It is well known that Prudhon and his pupil painted many pictures in collaboration. This has led to an undervaluation of her ability, and both the inferior works of Prudhon and bad imitations of him have been attributed to her. M. Genlet writes that when Emil Mayer studied under Greuze, she painted in his manner, and he inclines to the opinion that some pictures attributed to Greuze were the work of his pupil. In the same way she imitated Prudhon, and this critic thinks it by no means certain that the master finished her work, as has been alleged. In the museum at Nancy are Emil Mayer's portraits of Mme and Emil Voyant. In the Museum of Dijon is an ideal head by her, and in the Bordeaux Gallery is her picture, called Confidence. Innocence Prefers Love to Riches and The Torch of Venus are well-known works by Emil Mayer. B. Mesdag van Houten, S/B Gold Medal at Amsterdam, 1884, Bronze Medal, Paris Exposition, 1889. Born at Groningen, 1834. In 1856, she married Mesdag, who, rather late in life, decided to follow the career of a painter. His wife, not wishing to be separated from him in any sense, resolved on the same profession, and about 1870 they began their study. Mme. Mesdag acquired her technique with difficulty, and her success was achieved only as the result of great perseverance and continual labor. The artists of Oosterbeek and Brussels, who were her associates, materially aided her by their encouragement. She began the study of drawing at the age of 30, and her first attempt in oils was made 7 years later. Beginning with single twigs and working over them patiently, she at length painted whole trees and later animals. She came to know the peculiarities of nearly all native trees. She built a studio in the woods of Scheveningen, and there developed her characteristic close observation and careful reproduction of details. In the summer of 1872, M and Mme. Mesdag went to Friesland and Drenthe, where they made numerous sketches of the heath, sheep, farmhouses, and the people in their quaint costumes. One of Mme. Mesdag's pictures, afterward exhibited at Berlin, is thus described. On this canvas we see the moon, just as she has broken through a gray cloud, spreading her silvery sheen over the sleepy land. In the center, we are given a sheepfold, at the door of which a flock of sheep are jostling and pushing each other, all eager to enter their place of rest. The wave-like movement of these animals is particularly graceful and cleverly done. A little shepherdess is guiding them, as anxious to get them in as they are to enter, for this means the end of her day's work. Her worn-out blue petticoat is lighted up by a moonbeam. In her hand she appears to have a hoe. It is a most harmonious picture. Every line is in accord with its neighbor. While residing in Brussels, these two artists began to collect works of art for what is now known as the Mesdag Museum. In 1887, a wing was added to their house to accommodate their increasing treasures, which include especially good examples of modern French painting, pottery, tapestry, etc. In 1889, an exhibition of the works of these painters was held. Here convincing proof was given of Mesdag's accuracy, originality of interpretation, and her skill in the use of color. B. Merler, Agnes Slot, or Slot Merler, Agnes, /B. This artist follows the young Romantic movement in Denmark. She has embodied in her work a modern comprehension of old legends. The landscape and people of her native land seem to her as eminently suitable motives, and these realities she renders in the spirit of a bygone age, that of the national heroes of the sagas and epics of the country, or the lyric atmosphere of the folk songs. She may depict these conceptions, full of feeling, in the dull colors of the north, or in rich and glowing hues, but the impression she gives is much the same in both cases, a generally restful effect, though the faces in her pictures are full of life and emotion. Her choice of subjects and her manner of treatment almost inevitably introduce some archaic quality in her work. This habit, and the fact that she cares more for color than for drawing, are the usual criticisms of her pictures. Her Saint Agnes is an interesting rendering of a well-worn subject. Adelil the Proud, exhibited at the Paris Exposition of 1889, tells the story of the Duke of Friedensburg, who was in love with Adelil, the king's daughter. The king put him to death, and the attendants of Adelil made of his heart a viand which they presented to her. When she learned what this singular substance was that caused her to tremble violently, she asked for wine, and carrying the cup to her lips with a tragic gesture, in memory of her lover, she died of a broken heart. It is such legends as these that Slot Mahler revives, and by which she is widely known. B. Morisot or Morizot birth, /B. married name Manet. Born at Bourges, 1840, died in Paris, 1895. A pupil of Guichard and Oudenot. After her marriage to Eugene Manet, she came under the influence of his famous brother, Edouard. This artist signed her pictures with her maiden name, being too modest to use that which she felt belonged only to Edouard Manet in the world of art. A great interest was, however, aroused in the private galleries, where the works of the early Impressionists were seen, by the pictures of Berthe Morisot. Camille Mauclair, an enthusiastic admirer of this school of art, says, "Berthe Morisot will remain the most fascinating figure of Impressionism, the one who has stated most precisely the femininity of this luminous and iridescent art. A great-granddaughter of Fragonard, she seems to have inherited his talent. Corot and Renoir forcibly appealed to her. These elements, modified by her personal attitude, imparted a strong individuality to her works, which divided honors with her personal charms. According to the general verdict, she was equally successful in oils and watercolors. Her favorite subjects, although she painted, others were seacoast views, flowers, orchards, and gardens, and young girls in every variety of costume. After the death of Edouard Manet, she devoted herself to building up an appreciation of his work in the public mind. So intelligent were her methods that she doubtless had great influence in making the memory of his art enduring. Among her most characteristic works are The Memories of the Oise, 1864, Rose Bras, Finister, 1868, A Young Girl at a Window, 1870, A Pastel, Blanche, 1873, The Toilet, and A Young Woman at the Ball. Binet, Elizabeth, /B. The Fine Arts Jury of the St. Louis Exposition have accepted 3 works by this sculptor to be placed in the Fine Arts Building. They are the Albert Sidney Johnston Memorial, the portrait bust of Jacob Grimm in marble, and a bronze statuette of Garibaldi. It is unusual to allow so many entries to one artist. B. Polly, Hannah/B., family name Hirsch, bronze medal at Paris Exposition, 1889. Born in Stockholm and pupil of the Academy of Fine Arts there, later, of Dagnan Bouverit in Paris. Her husband, also an artist, is Georg Polly. They live in Stockholm, where she paints portraits and genre subjects. At the Paris Exposition, 1900, she exhibited 2 excellent portraits, one of her father and another of Ellen Key, also a charming genre subject, the old couple. B. Romani, Juana, H.C., /B born at Velletri, 1869. Pupil of Henner and Roybet in Paris where she lives. This artist is, sui generis, a daughter of the people, of unconventional tastes and habits. She has boldly reproduced upon canvas a fullness of life and joy, such as is rarely seen in pictures. While she has caught something of the dash of Henner, and something of the color of Roybet, and gained a firm mastery of the best French technique, these are infused with the ardor of a Southern temperament. Her favorite subjects are women either in the strength and beauty of maternity, or in the freshness of youth, or even of childhood. Some critics feel that, despite much that is desirable in her work, the soul is lacking in the women she paints. This is no doubt due in some measure to certain types she has chosen, for example, Salome and Herodias, in whom one scarcely looks for such an element. Her portrait of Roybet and a picture of Bianca Capello were exhibited at Munich in 1893 and at Antwerp in 1894. The Penserosa and a little girl were at the Paris Salon in 1894 and were much admired. Herodias appeared at Vienna in 1894 and at Berlin the following year, while Primavera was first seen at the Salon of 1895. This picture laughs, as children laugh, with perfect abandon. A portrait of Miss Gibson was also at the Salon of 1895, and Vittoria Colonna and a Venetian girl were sent to Munich. These were followed by the Flower of the Alps and Desdemona in 1896. Donna Mona, palpitating with life, and Faustella of Pistia, with short golden hair and a majestic poise of the head, in 1897. Salome and Angelica, two widely differing pictures in character and color, in 1898. Mina of Fiesole, and the portrait of a golden-haired beauty in a costume of black and gold, in 1899, the portrait of Amel. H.D. in 1900, El Infante. One of her most noble creations, of a remarkably fine execution, and a ravishing child called Roger, with wonderful blonde hair, in 1901. Emil Romany often paints directly on the canvas without preliminary sketch or study, and sells many of her pictures before they are finished. Some of her works have been purchased by the French government, and there are examples of these in the Luxembourg and in the Gallery of Mulhausen. B. Ruprecht Tinney, /B. After having lessons from private instructors, this artist studied under Lenbach. She has been much influenced by Gainsborough, Lawrence, and Reynolds, traces of their manner being evident in her work. She renders the best type of feminine seductiveness with delicacy and grace. She avoids the trivial and gross, but pictures all the allurements of an innocent coquetry. Her portrait of the Princess Marie of Romania was exhibited in Munich in 1901. Its reality and personality were notable, and one critic called it an oasis in a desert of portraits. Anno 1793 and A Mother and Child have attracted much favorable comment in Munich, where her star is in the ascendant, and greater excellence in her work is confidently prophesied. B. Schwartzy, Therese, /B. Honorable Mention, Paris Salon, 1885, Gold Medal, 1889. Diploma at Ghent, 1892, Gold Medal, 1892. At International Exhibition, Barcelona, 1898, a Gold Medal. Made a Knight of the Order of Orange Nassau, 1896. Born in Amsterdam about 1851. A pupil of her father until his death, when she became a student under Gabriel Max in Munich for a year. Returning to Amsterdam, she was much encouraged by Israels, Bilders, and Bosboom, friends of her father. She went to Paris in 1878 and was so attracted by the artistic life which she saw that she determined to study there. But she did not succeed in finding a suitable studio, neither an instructor who pleased her, and she returned to Amsterdam. It was at this time that she painted the portrait of Frederick Muller. In the spring of 1880, she went again to Paris, only to feast on things artistic. A little later, she was summoned to the palace at Soestdijk to instruct the Princess Henry of the Netherlands. In 1883, she served with many distinguished artists on the art jury of the International Exhibition at Amsterdam. In 1884, she once more yielded to the attraction that Paris had for her, and there made a great advance in her painting. In 1885, she began to work in pastel, and one of her best portraits in this medium was that of the Princess, Queen Wilhelmina, which was loaned by the Queen Regent for the exhibition of this artist's work in Amsterdam in 1890. The Italian government requested Miss Schwartzy to paint her own portrait for the Uffizi Gallery. This was shown at the Paris Salon 1889, and missed the gold medal by 2 votes. This portrait is thought by some good judges to equal that of Mme. Lebrun. The head with the interesting eyes, shaded by the hand which wards off the light, and the penetrating, observant look are most impressive. She has painted a portrait of Queen Emma and sent to Berlin in 1902 a portrait of Walmeran, a member of the Transvaal government, which was esteemed a work of the first rank. She has painted several portraits of her mother, which would have made for her a reputation had she done no others. She has had many notable men and women among her sitters, and though not a robust woman, she works incessantly without filling all the commissions offered her. Her pictures are in the museums of Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Her work is full of life and strength, and her touch shows her confidence in herself and her technical knowledge. She is, however, a severe critic of her own work and is greatly disturbed by indiscriminating praise. She is serious and preoccupied in her studio, but with her friends she is full of gaiety and is greatly admired, both as a woman and as an artist. B. van der Veer, Miss/B. This artist, says a recent critic, has studied to some purpose in excellent continental schools, and is endowed with a creative faculty and breadth in conception rarely found in American painters of either sex. Her genre work is full of life, light, color, and character, with picturesque grouping, faultless atmosphere, and a breadth of technical treatment that verges on audacity, yet never fails of its design purpose. The 50 pictures exhibited by Miss van der Veer in Philadelphia in February 1904 included interiors, portraits mostly in pastel flower studies and sketches, treating Dutch peasant life. Among the most notable of these may be mentioned the chimney corner, Saturday morning, mother and child, and a portrait of the artist herself. B. Waldau Margarethe/B. born in Breslau, 1860. After studying by herself in Munich, this artist became a pupil of Streckfuss in Berlin, and later in Nuremberg studied under the younger Grebe and Ritter. The first subject chosen by her for a picture was the portal of the Church of the Magdalene. Her taste for architectural motives was strengthened by travel in Russia, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. The fine old churches of Nuremberg and the venerable edifices of Breslau afforded her most attractive subjects, which she treated with such distinction that her pictures were sought by kings and princes as well as by appreciative connoisseurs. Her success increased her confidence in herself and enhanced the boldness and freedom with which she handled her brush. An exhibition of her work in Berlin led to her receiving a commission from the government to paint 2 pictures for the Paris Exposition, 1900. Mayence at sunset and the Leipzig marketplace in winter were the result of this order and are 2 of her best works. Occasionally, this artist has painted genre subjects, but her real success has not been in this direction. End of the project Gutenberg e-book of women in the fine arts, from the 7th century B.C. to the 20th century A.D. by Clara Erskine Clement.